This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning we will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Before we move on, I would like to ask the committee to note the change in membership of the committee following agreement at the London Assembly plenary meeting on the 23rd of January. And I welcome Leonie Cooper, AM, to the Police and Crime Committee. I know you'll enjoy it, Leonie. We all do. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Assembly Member Duval, for whom Assembly Member Clark is attending as a substitute.
Thank you, Assembly Member Clark. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of December to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Excellent. So here we go. We now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Kaya Comer-Schwartz, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and Matt Twist, Assistant Commissioner, Frontline Policing, MPS. Good morning, both. And I would like to officially say it is wonderful to have the police, a police officer here. So we're very, very grateful for you attending. I know at the beginning you just want to talk, and congratulations coming out of special measures, and I know you'd like to just say a few words about that to start with.
Well, Chair, thank you, and very happy to be here. So, good morning, Committee Chair. Last week marked a very significant milestone in the Met's journey, with His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary confirming that the MPS have been taken out of the engaged status. I think the progress we've made over the last 2.5 years would not have been possible without the unwavering passion, sense of duty, courage and hard work of our officers and staff in the face of some incredibly challenging circumstances, and also some unique operational demands that we've spoken about in this committee before. We've made significant improvements to a whole range of areas, including call handling, child exploitation, public protection, culture and counter-corruption. Our officers and staff have worked tirelessly to address more than 100 recommendations, several causes for concern, and improve our service to the public of London. They've done so in the face of significant budget challenge, the sustained demand of public order and protest across the capital, and increased scrutiny and accountability, all while continuing their day jobs to keep Londoners safe. We of course know there is more to do, but we do want to take a moment to pause and ensure that we recognise the determination of our officers and staff who've delivered this enormous progress and enabled us to reach this very, very important milestone.
Lovely. As I say, congratulations. Just before we start our questioning, a little birdie told me that, and you were involved, that's why I'm asking you, Matt, that the Royal Parks Police are going to be stopped. Can you just confirm or deny that?
So I could do neither. What I can say is, as the committee will be aware, there are some significant budget challenges that we're facing as we go into next year, which is going to involve us taking some tough choices. The headcount within the Met is going to reduce by over 1,000 people, even with the additional money that the Home Office has been able to provide. We don't yet know what the final budget settlement is, but we've outlined a series of tough choices that may need to be made in order to balance the books.
No, we know that. I just had wind of the fact that there was a meeting this week, and I wondered whether you'd be able to update us. But if you can't, fair enough. We understand and know the situation. Thank you for that. The first section on today's agenda is grooming gangs and group-based child sexual exploitation. So if I can start the questioning, I'll start with you, Kaya. What work has MOPAC and the Met undertaken to understand the nature of grooming gangs in London?
Thank you very much, Chair. We know that this is obviously an issue that we're all deeply concerned and passionate about. Exploitation and sexual exploitation of children is a heinous crime, and it's something that I know the Mayor has been passionate about for a long, over his whole term. He's invested millions in violence against women and girls, supported organisations like...
Kaya, forgive me for interrupting, we've got such a long agenda today. If you could home in on the actual question. So the question was, what work has been undertaken to understand the nature of grooming gangs in London?
Yes. Chair, I'm referring to the work that MOPAC's done in commissioning.
No, just grooming gangs. Let's just talk about grooming gangs. We've got a whole section on VAUG later, so grooming gangs.
Okay, well, through the work we do on exploitation, moreover violence and exploitation, the Violence and Exploitation Support Service we've set up, the commissioning work we do to support organisations like Exit London and Rescue and Response, and the Lighthouse, who work primarily with victims of sexual exploitation. Those are the kind of work we've been doing, especially, and also working with Met to set up specialist units that look into this. Last week I visited Holborn, where they have a dedicated team to look at child abuse, and I know that Matt wants to come in to give the committee an update on the current picture.
No, okay, I will definitely go to you, Matt, because if we can home in just on this section on grooming gangs, what do you know and understand of them in London, or do we not have any? I mean, none of us know, and we'd really like an answer.
So I think one of the challenges is, when we talk about grooming gangs, lots of people are talking about different things, and there's lots of discourse on social media and other places, meaning it's one thing or another. I'm going to talk about child exploitation, which includes child sexual abuse, which we know has come into sharp focus in recent weeks. Officers are clearly committed to safeguarding children and young people who are at risk of child exploitation and child sexual abuse, and this includes children and young people we see at risk of recruitment into gangs. The largest prevalence of this within London is actually children being recruited into county lines gangs, so to support gangs in either transiting drugs, controlled substances, moving illegal weapons, other things around. We also know, as the committee will, that the Home Secretary has announced a rapid audit of grooming gangs, and has set up 5 new local inquiries, and we will look to find out, look out for the findings of that. It's important to note, and I think there's something again that is sometimes misrepresented. I want to be clear: the Met will always follow the evidence where it takes us, no matter how uncomfortable the conclusions might be or how it might impact on communities. So we police without fear or favour, and we will go where the evidence takes us. In terms of the action that we talk about, and to be focusing on child exploitation, there are a number of things, whether we talk about cookering, trafficking, child criminal exploitation, child sexual exploitation. All of these are appalling crimes. But we do take it extremely seriously, and there's already been significant action to better respond. We've significantly increased the number of child exploitation cases identified and flagged by officers, which was previously raised by the HMI. The number of child criminal exploitation reports has increased from 65 to 2,799, of which 887 are under current investigation. The number of this has been done by improving the way we grade risk in missing people investigations and through additional training that we've provided frontline staff. Our action also includes launching the Children's Strategy in September of 2024, which is a significant milestone in helping us adopt a child-first approach. More than 8,000 frontline officers have received training to improve identification of child exploitation, and we've uplifted our Public Protection Command by 565 people, 465 officers and 94 staff, specifically intended to spot some of this. And over 50 detective sergeants from central teams have been transferred to improve local boroughs' oversight of investigations such as this. Finally, the learning we've taken from Opsateria is that we've trained all of our RASO, rape and serious sexual offences investigators, and also will soon be training first responders in the need for a victim-centred, suspect-focused and context-led investigation when it comes to sexual abuse cases. This will include all forms of child sexual exploitation and, to paraphrase, grooming. So this will help make sure that vulnerable victims who need the most understanding and care are supported by specially trained officers.
Good. That's all good, and we commend you for that. When, in this particular instance, the public don't know that all this work goes on, and it's good that we can let the public know that you're doing so much around children. But the public see grooming gangs at the moment as the same as in Oldham, when a group of men literally coerce young children to have sex with them. That is what the public are regarding as grooming gangs at the moment. So if we look at that specifically, and I know it's a much wider issue, but if we look at that specifically, do you think we've got any of those types of gangs in London?
So I think at the moment the biggest threat to young people is criminal exploitation centred around county lines, as opposed to the types of grooming gangs that we've seen in other parts of the country. I'm not going to say it's never happened or can't happen, and I know that separately, Chair, you've been offered a sort of private briefing on some of the intelligence that we're looking at and some of the live
I was
jobs
off that yesterday, and absolutely.
We're looking at, which will enable us to give more detail on some of the intelligence and the live work that we're doing. I would say, in general terms, we are not seeing the characterisation of what's been seen in places like Rotherham and Oldham and other places in the north of England is not the picture that we're seeing here. Our picture is much more nuanced, it's much more diverse, and involves a much wider spectrum of exploitation than solely a group of men from one particular ethnicity targeting a group of young girls from a different ethnicity. That isn't the picture that we're seeing.
Yeah, but we also saw the Scottish situation just recently. So I'm not saying it's from a specific group. I've never said that. It's just the whole way it is dealt with. And are you saying that, as far as you know, there are none? Are you saying we don't want to discuss it because of, security or whatever? If you're saying that, that's fine. but I just would like an answer of some description. Do we have any of these in London?
So I'm not going to go into numbers, because whether it's 2 people or 15, I mean, how do we define the thing? There is definitely cases where more than one person might be involved in exploitation. As I've touched on, there are countless gangs. I'm not going to go into numbers as to what we've got and what we haven't got. I'm happy separately to brief you or members of this committee in private on intelligence and the work that we're currently doing around exploitation. But I think the important thing for this committee is that in London it is a much wider problem. As in, it isn't just focused on sexual exploitation, it's focused on other things, it's focused on criminal exploitation, focused on trafficking, as well as the obvious threat of sexual exploitation. And I've outlined how I think the Met has responded very well. And it is important to note that part of the reason we got out of HMIC Engage is as a result of sharpening significantly our response to this type of criminality.
Okay. I hear what you say. I'm pleased about the work, but I wish we could have had that answered in a clearer way. Can I just ask you, Kaya, as a former council leader, you'll be aware of some of the child protection failings in London boroughs, in the likes of Lambeth and Lewisham. How confident are you that had child grooming gangs, in the way that we know them from Oldham, etc., been operating in a borough, it would have been identified in the local authority? Because obviously local authorities play a big part in this. We can't always just look to the police to deal with these things. You know, we've got 32 boroughs, so what's your answer to that?
I completely recognise that, you know, through the legislation, that safeguarding of children is a statutory role for all statutory partners. That's why it's organised across the 3 partnerships of the health, local authorities and the Met, and they regularly need to work together to do all they can to safeguard children. I think it's really important that that duty, as regularly inspected in local authorities through Ofsted, is really important, and the learning we find in any of those cases are acted upon. I think it's also important to recognise that the government has now said that there will be a national investigation into this topic, and as part of that, any NFA cases will be reviewed and taken forward. I think we need to be really clear that, you know, safeguarding children has to be our #1 priority, and any failings in that, any less than child-focused approaches, has to be tackled head-on, because it has to be our top priority, keeping children safe.
Okay. Would you be happy if a specific investigation was made into the whole of London and funded separately? I'm more than aware of the constraints the Met have. I mean, we've called for a national look at this, a national investigation. What about a London-wide one funded by the Mayor?
The national investigation obviously will cover London, and we'll do all we can to feed into that together as the partnership. It's really important, and I think, you know, it's really important that it is done nationally, because if legislation needs updating, needs changing, we must learn together as a country about that. As you've just remarked, you know, the latest gang was in Scotland. It's a whole national approach that's needed. So we're very happy to work with the Home Office to feed into that.
Okay, I'll go over to Assembly Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to both of our panel members. I'm going to start with the police. I want to be very clear. For me, this isn't a posture defensive from the police. In the past, the Metropolitan Police has had very significant problems with child protection. That's one of the main reasons you went into special measures, as it were. You've improved that. I think the question I want to ask is this. The failings nationally have been around people's reluctance to report. You know, you have people who are afraid of what it will do for their career and their personal life. Do you think that culture exists in the Met? You made a comment earlier on that with no fear or favour, but other police forces would have said the same.
Yes, Lord Bailey, thank you. I think we've moved significantly, and over time we've seen how the Met has become much more responsive to this type of threat. We've seen the investment, both in terms of people, specialist skills and training, that means that I am much more confident than I have ever been that now we would spot this and we would take action. We've seen how the numbers of flags that have been identified on missing person reports, specifically linked to children, has increased, so these can be better investigated. We also know that I think some of the victimology that we see, victims are often vulnerable in these cases. Victims are less likely to report, so we need to be even more alert to try and identify this. And again, in some cases, particularly linked to wider exploitation, reports suggest that some of the children don't often recognise themselves as victims because they're being treated in a certain way by their exploiters. And they're sort of drawn into this. So again, being sure that in terms of our investigations, particularly into missing children, which is often the sort of first flag that you get, that we're spotting these risks. And the evidence would suggest that we are doing much better. The treatment of missing people and how we do it has significantly changed. The number of children that are missing that are graded as high risk has significantly increased. And our investigations to find those children and be curious, and I think this is about the investigative curiosity as to what is going on, has improved significantly in recent years. And I do, as you say, think this is a core plank about how we've moved from a position where we were in Engage and not doing as well as we should have been, to a position where now, with the additional 565 people in public protection, that we're actually doing really well.
I happen to agree. Nowhere's perfect, but I happen to agree it's one of the areas that you've moved forward quite well. But the failings with investigating this grooming gang situation elsewhere really rotated around culture, people's fear, not wanting to appear to be racist, not being able to make the link, Are you confident that you have the mechanisms to make that link? And the specific question is, how are you interfacing with local authorities? Because your end of it, missing children, etc., the first flag, do you have the link to go to a local authority to try to build a pattern of what's going on?
Yeah, very much so. So I think, again, this links to public protection investment through the sort of statutory bodies working with local authorities and in our multi-agency safeguarding hubs and the strategy meetings that we have around the management of vulnerable children that come to police notice. These links are being made and are being joined up. And again, where we have particularly young people that are repeat missing, often these are the most vulnerable in society. These are people that are in sort of either from children's homes or in getting additional support through children's services across a sort of wide range of needs. Through the strategy meetings, through the MASHs, the multi-agency safeguarding hubs, we are very active in looking to spot those risks and trying to join the dots. And I think the key thing is are we joining the dots? My assessment is that we are doing so now. Whilst nothing is ever going to be perfect, and I won't pretend that it is, we're doing this much better now than we ever have done.
Okay, agree. Deputy Mayor, let's try one more time. What are MOPAC doing to help the police and local councils navigate that relationship piece so that patterns can be identified? Do you feel that MOPAC has any stake in that? Is anything you're doing to help?
Thank you. Lord Bailey, I think it's really important to recognise that MOPAC, new London Violence and Exploitation Support Service, is key in this, as well as the London Child Exploitation Operating Protocol, whilst led by the MPS, is definitely supported by the Mayor's Office and other safeguarding partners that recognises and tries to reduce harms and threats posed to children through exploitation. We continue to make sure that we're monitoring and evaluating those partnerships through our governance arrangements. So we're definitely key to that. And as mentioned before, as well as making sure that, as Matt mentioned, one of the reasons the Met was in Engage was exploitation of children, and that's something that MOPAC's evidence and sadly had to raise with the HMIC, and I think has followed up with investment in those support for the Met that has seen the turnaround that we've seen, which has been, you know, significant and important. And I also, you know, I know that the Mayor's Office has been intrinsic in working on the children's strategy that we've discussed before here in this committee. So it's definitely a partnership approach, and we continue to do all we can to support local authorities and the Met to make sure that children are our number one priority when it comes to safeguarding.
Very last question to AC. How is the Met managing the tension between a child-centred approach and enforcement? In the black community, we suffered for years with black children being treated as adults solely because they were black. If you look at the failings in this grooming gang situation, it's been young white girls being treated a particular way because they're from a working class background. How do you deal with that? Because as police officers, your focus is enforcement, correct? But you're now given a new focus. How are you dealing with that tension?
So I think it's a challenge, isn't it? And the adultification of young black boys is something that we were, again, very alert to and came out through a lot of the work that we've done in terms of how we deal with things like stop and search, how custody procedures and other things. So we're very alert to it. Of course, this is a much wider challenge for the whole of society, for social services, for education, for others. The police role, as you say, is first and foremost, it's about dealing with the criminal aspect. And so we do need to be careful. We do need to, and we have seen some awful examples, haven't we, nationally, where sort of children were sort of dealt with as suspects as opposed to dealt with as victims. And I think we're very much trying to turn that on its head. And this is the key thing here for us, is the children's strategy, which we've just launched, which sets out a child-first approach, which is a significant milestone and is something that we're training over 8,000 frontline officers in to ensure that we can better recognise and more quickly recognise signs of child exploitation. So it will always be a tension, because policing ultimately is around the law enforcement and preventing and detecting crime. But we know that this has strayed into we're doing so much more around spotting the signs, around trying to avoid risks like adultification. And the experiences that we've had over recent years just point to the changes that we've needed to make and have made.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbutt.
Morning. Just two quick questions, probably for Matt. I was interested in what you were just saying about first responders being trained in a victim-first approach. I was quite shocked to know that they're not already, but I just wondered if you could say when you think first responders will be fully equipped to take that victim-first approach. And then my other question was just that the 2022 report from Alexis Jay into this issue said that the widespread failure in the case study areas was to record the ethnicity of perpetrators and victims of child sexual exploitation. So I just wondered if that's something that's been taken on by the Met. Thank you.
Thank you. So officers are trained as part of all basic training and investigation in terms of, a victim first approach. I was talking specifically around training to improve officers' ability to identify child exploitation, which is something I think links to Lord Bailey's question actually around, do we focus too much on the enforcement of what's right in front of you, as opposed to thinking more widely as to why we might be there, why the person might have gone missing. And I think that's what the 8,000 frontline officers that have been trained in. In terms of the Alexis Jay report recording of ethnicity, our data isn't perfect, but it's improving. And I would... it's something that we need to record in terms of both the suspect, because it helps us detect them and arrest them, but also in terms of the victim, both the victim's ethnicity as we see it, but also their self-defined ethnicity. That is something that through the new sort of crime recording system we're improving. It's not 100% yet, there are still gaps, but it's significantly better than what it once was.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Deputy Mayor. Good morning, Assistant Commissioner. My question, Assistant Commissioner, is about the issues around the national audit that we're now going to have. You quite rightly, I think, have identified the issues around exploitation of children, per se, and I think it's really important that we do, that we are very clear that there is an issue about exploitation of children, and it is good to see that that is your first priority, and that is making sure that that we can deal with that. I mean, you quite rightly have said, as the service on the ground, you've spoken about criminal exploitation, trafficking, county lines being major issues. Could I ask you, what impact do you think that the national audit will have on the Met, including any challenges and opportunities for London?
Thank you. I think the first thing to say is that whilst we're aware of the Home Secretary's announcement, Baroness Casey's work isn't yet underway. We're yet to see the terms of reference, and of course the Met will play a full part once the audit is underway and help in any way we can. I think the benefits nationally and in London is that it continues the focus on this issue. It will identify any opportunities where we could further improve, notwithstanding significant changes have been made already. And also for things like at times where, as we know, and we may touch on later, sort of budgets are incredibly difficult. One of our very early decisions when looking at where we would take reductions is that we wouldn't roll back on the significant investment that we've made in these areas, particularly in public protection and specifically in child abuse investigation teams, which are now fully staffed across all of our BCUs. On the point around sort of potential victims, I mean, our recent reporting would suggest that 71% of potential victims of child criminal exploitation are those that are being exploited into drugs and county line activity. That's the vast bulk of the exploitation we're seeing. And that's something that we continue to robustly address through our Operation Yamato and Operation Orochi teams that are sort of daily dealing with this, and almost daily I'm getting reports of how we've effectively rescued young missing children, often missing boys, teenagers in different parts of the country as a result of the work that our Orochi and Yamato sort of specialist crime teams are doing.
Thank you. We've had reference this morning to the Professor Alexis Jay report. I would like to be asking you questions about how those recommendations were taken forward by the Met. Unfortunately, the previous government chose not to take those recommendations forward. So what I will ask you about instead is the Inspectorate's reports about the effectiveness of the police and law enforcement bodies. And what is the Met doing with regard to this in response to group-based child sexual exploitation? Have you had a chance to take any of that forward?
So I'm not going to add anything beyond what I've said already in this, in terms of a lot of focus was placed on this during our process through the Engage process, and the improvements that we've made and the investments that we've made are pointing significantly towards an improved both processes, recognition of risk, assessment of risk, and also dealing with perpetrators in this space. I haven't got line by line in front of me the recommendations, so I'm not going to sort of touch on that now, but other than to say through the Engage process, all of this will have been considered.
Thank you, Chair. I think, Chair, thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Chair, I think my next two questions have actually been answered in the Assistant Commissioner's responses, so I won't take any more time.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Because we keep talking about a national inquiry, and of course there is none because the current government utterly refuses to do that, although this is a national problem, it strikes me that London has been quite successful in improving its child outcomes, its child protection outcomes. Do you think that it would have been useful for other police forces to understand the process that you've been through to improve?
Lord Bailey, thank you. I think there's always learning we can take from other forces, and we've done this regularly, and I'm not going to pretend that we have yet got this perfect. That isn't the case. There is more we can do, and we're constantly working with national bodies, including the College of Policing and the HMI, to identify if there are areas where we can improve. There are national leads on these subjects who sort of set guidance and develop the policy nationally. Of course, if anybody is interested in seeing how the Met have done things, we are always very, very open and welcome visitors, but I wouldn't yet profess to be the beacon of good practice. I think that's for others to judge. All we can do is get on with the work, deal with the training, deal with the perpetrators, and work with partners to ensure that more children are safeguarded. That's our priority, and if others are interested in what we're doing and if others judge that we are being successful, then of course we would welcome any interest in that. But at the moment I'm still focused on seeing what we can do better.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was really interested in your comments at the beginning. Assistant Commissioner? So I'm just looking at AC and thinking, I've got to get that right. About nuance and a diverse situation that we have in London, because I have worked nationally and I think it is very different in London as a metropolis than many of the smaller towns where we have seen these situations that we talked about in terms of child sexual exploitation and groups of people being involved in that. And one of the things that I noticed when we went through you also talked about the BCUs and being fully staffed. When we moved to the BCUs, the basic command units, I was very struck. I represent Merton and Wandsworth, which is part of the 4-borough BCU. So several people said, oh, that's terrible. You know, you should have a 2-borough BCU. But one of the issues there was that 3 of the boroughs had very, very small child sexual exploitation teams, and bringing them together in the 4-borough BCU allowed that to be strengthened. And obviously we did that reorganisation some time ago. And you were talking about bringing in more staff. Do you think in some ways that reorganisation has helped us to then build stronger teams? Because that was one of the things that I thought might be a benefit from the BCU reorganisation, although we had lots of issues about it when it went through.
Yeah. So I think it definitely has. In that replicating sort of a set of services 32 times is going to be much more difficult and complex than it is 12 times. And there are economies you can achieve with scale, and also better specialisms, better experience that you can bring to bear if you're doing it at a larger scale. So I think that's right. I think it's also right that sort of 2 years ago we hadn't invested enough in our public protection teams, and one of the core issues that people reported to us all and to the HMI was the unreasonably high workloads that some of our detectives were faced with, because they didn't have enough staff to deal with, one, the complexity, which is growing. Every case now takes longer to investigate, every case has more risk, every case has a digital footprint that once it might not have done, but also the volume. So now the investment of the 565 extra people into public protection is to rebalance those workloads, to make them manageable. And we are already seeing some of the successes as a result of that. In terms of our detection rates for rape and serious sexual assault are significantly up. We're sort of I think we're nearly top quartile in the country. We're certainly the best of our most similar forces. Our investigation and detection rates into child sexual abuse, into indecent images, into other sexual offending are also significantly up. So we're seeing the benefits now of the investment that we've made over the last 2 years. My challenge now is ensuring that success continues to grow, to make sure that we do even better with the investment that we've made, as those people gain more experience, as they start working together over a longer period of time. And the signs that visiting certainly Bethnal Green and Holborn last week in their public protection teams, one of them with Kaya, we saw some incredibly enthusiastic and passionate detectives who were just determined to bring perpetrators to justice and to safeguard the exploited children. And I was really very encouraged by what I saw.
So just on that point of bringing people together in the teams and strengthening them, but also the increasing complexity of the situations, what support are we offering to the staff who are, looking at some of these images, having to deal with some of the things that child sexual exploitation involves? Are we supporting our staff through this? This is a question I quite often ask my borough commander, because, we put a lot onto the police, but are we supporting officers who are going through this kind of thing?
So I think we're trying, and there's more available now in terms of formalised support through our TRIM process, which is officers responding to trauma through our occupational health process and through our psychological screening in some roles. So we do have officers whose job almost full-time is dealing with the most appalling cases of child abuse, and other officers whose job full-time is dealing with indecent images online. And for those really specialist roles, there is, of course, additional screening and additional support, including psychological support and screening that that means we can, one, check that they're okay, and two, check that they're sort of suited in the first place to be doing that sort of really difficult work. I think it's the really challenging end of what policing does, isn't it? And, you know, some of the descriptions of the cases that I was sort of talking to detectives about last week were just absolutely appalling. And
I think for most of us it's completely unimaginable.
Exactly, and you don't, I think the public don't understand just how heinous some of this stuff is. So yeah, we are working to support officers. I also think by adding strength and adding numbers, that also brings a level of support in officers that feel, whilst they're still incredibly busy, let's not pretend that suddenly everyone's got lots of time on their hands and there aren't many cases. They all remain incredibly busy. But actually having bigger teams, having lower caseloads per officer is certainly helping with that as well.
And also having colleagues who've gone through the same experiences, I think you can get more support from. But coming back from the officers back to the victims, which I think is really what we're talking about, I was very struck yesterday by a piece of investigative reporting and working with officers who were going out to hotels. I don't know whether you will probably have heard it because it was fairly widely reported, and they were talking about budget hotels, some of which have this sort of system where you can just walk in and plug in a number and pick up a key from a box and you don't even have to speak to somebody. Obviously, I won't mention budget chains of hotels, but we do have hotels of that nature in London. The way that the news piece was set out, it implied that it was outside of London and near major roads and not here. But are we aware that hotels are being used by people who want to exploit children in this way in London?
So I saw that piece yesterday. I mean, I think it's what happens elsewhere in the country is likely to happen in London as well. I haven't got specific details on specific cases that we can point to. But I'm also aware of those hotels. Some of them do exist in London, and you know that clearly is a risk, and it's clearly something we'll need to be alert to.
I mean, maybe that's something you could come back to us privately on then after the meeting, and which brings me on to my final point, which is about
very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. What further action do you think is necessary to understand the full scale and nature of group-based child sexual exploitation in London? Do you think what more can we do, basically?
So my initial reaction to that is let's wait and see what the sort of outcome of the national review is. I think that's going to be really important. I don't want to jump ahead of that or prejudge that. We need to continue to embed the sort of progress that we've made and the work that we've done to make sure that we're delivering better outcomes for victims. So my next step, I think, is to make sure we've implemented the recommendations that currently exist, that we continue to build on the progress we've made to get her to engage, and then to see what the national review recommends.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And briefly from Assemblymember Moema.
Thank you, very briefly. And my question is to you, Assistant Commissioner, and it relates to, I guess, I have been to see your officers at Bethnal Green, the Predatory Offender Unit, and the great work that they do to identify those who put people at risk. But with the upcoming government review, I don't know what view the police have around sentencing of those who are accused of child sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation. Many of us think that some of those sentences that are handed down are woefully inadequate, and I don't know what view the Met and other forces may express to the government about strengthening some of that.
Thank you. I mean, look, sentencing is a matter for His Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service and the independent judiciary. I'm loath to comment on it. What is clear, though, is that you see recidivist offending. You see people that are put in, that have a sort of, particularly if they have shorter jail terms, then come out and can offend again, which means, as you mentioned and as you saw, we end up managing these people in the community, and there's only so much of that we can do. Some of the risks have been highlighted, and actually some of our good work has been through initiatives like using live facial recognition, where through deployment of that, we are spotting and stopping significant numbers of registered sex offenders, making some inquiries and then finding that some of them are in breach of their conditions. Actually, in one particularly concerning example, in the last couple of weeks, we stopped one registered sex offender who was escorting the child of somebody else who didn't realise that there was a risk. So the LFR stuff is one of those initiatives that really helps us in terms of managing that. But the more that the policing and partners are managing this in the community, there is a risk. It's a matter for Parliament, it's a matter for government and a matter for the courts as to where the sentencing lines are drawn. Our job, and we will continue to focus on our job, is to put these criminals in front of the court and let the court decide.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to add and reassure you, Assembly Member Momoa, that the government just put out a consultation on the sentencing review, and we submitted evidence through MOPAC on exploitation in particular, and why we feel that child exploitation should definitely have stronger sentencing and clearer sentencing, especially in relation to things like the NRM. You know, at the moment, I feel that's a significant loophole that needs closing, and that it needs to be extremely clear that the exploitation of children should result in, you know, the sentences that it deserves, which should be strong.
Thank you. First, Matt, I'd like to say live facial recognition, fantastic, a fabulous thing for you to be able to use to get these villains behind bars. Excellent. The only other couple of quick bits, do you keep ethnicity data now on all these perpetrators?
Yeah, it's one of our mandatory recording areas in terms of suspects and victims, both in terms of victims' self-defined ethnicity and officer-defined, and also we would always record the ethnicity of the suspect, because that's critical in terms of identifying them.
Yes, absolutely. It was mentioned in the Casey review that it needed to be done more, hence the question. And thank you for the explanation about the amount of children in exploitation into county lines, and I get that. I do think, though, that the public appreciate that there's 9 million people in London and they see all these gangs elsewhere, and inevitably people think there must be some in London, which is why we've been posing the questions. And I look forward to the private briefing, but I do think the public need to know, because they need to be more aware, because not only should councils be part of this and part of helping the police, but so should the public. So, you know, we'll see how that goes. We're now moving on to the draft police and crime plan, and my colleague, Assembly Member Best, is going to start the questions.
Thanks. Good morning, both. And Assistant Commissioner, it was, as the Chair says, great to hear you talking about the benefits of live facial recognition, and I hope you've passed that on to the Deputy Mayor, who's been somewhat sceptical and opposed in previous times. Just looking at the draft police and crime plan, it doesn't look much different from the previous iteration, and in fact when we heard from our guests at our last meeting, I think that was pretty much the broad analysis that these plans across the country are much of a muchness. So in order to get away from that much of a muchness evaluation, what would you, both of you, pick out as the key differences and change of direction in this plan?
To me first, or Kai, thank you.
I'm happy to start. Thank you, Assembly Member Best. I think it's really important that we reflect that this is almost an evolution of the Mayor's previous police and crime plan. Obviously, we all know the challenges of London, so it rightly focuses on reducing violence and criminal exploitation, as we've just discussed, a priority for us all, increasing trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police Service, which, as we all know, on the back of the Casey review, has to be a continued focus, and improving the criminal justice system and supporting victims victims, as we've discussed before in this committee. We need to start from, you know, the first report right through back into probation to make sure that the whole system is working to keep London safe. So those priorities, I think it would be strange if they weren't continuations, if they weren't continued priorities.
But
and the evidence
across the entire plan, what's new and what's different? That's pulling out, telling us what's the same. We can see that as a committee. What should we be looking at that is new and different in this plan?
I mean, I think, you know, we have got the opportunity of working with a different national government and that allowing a greater focus. It's something that I know I've discussed here before, but I think a real strength is a focus from the Metropolitan Police, the Mayor's Office and the Home Office to really work on neighbourhood policing, getting that back into the forefront, really tackling, I know, a real priority of this committee, that high volume crime, antisocial behaviour, that community link and partnership into policing is something that I definitely, you know, have pushed to be at the forefront of this plan. So I think that that's a real opportunity. But I think it would be wrong for us. We need to be evidence-led. We need to be following what the data says. And the data says we need to continue to focus on these areas that we've outlined. And as well as it would be, you know, really remiss of us to take our focus off on improving trust and confidence in the safety of London.
You don't think neighbourhood policing was a priority before? What do you think's changed in that?
I think a greater investment, obviously, from the government now that we have in this area, the neighbourhood policing plans. I think the commissioners' work so far on being really clear on fixing the foundations and bringing back a greater prioritisation on neighbourhood policing. I think that that's something that, you know, working with local authorities, I've heard is a real, you know, has been a real gap. And we're seeing, you know, a greater prioritisation through that. We're working, I know we might discuss this later on as well, through the robbery partnerships to really invest and enable that. And I think it's starting to bear fruit. But I don't know, Matt, if you want to...
I'm just going to come quickly, because I'm struggling to link what you're saying to the plan and what's new and different in the plan. And you're talking a lot about a focus, you know, an investment from government. I mean, the last government, let's be real, the Mayor handed millions and millions and millions of pounds back to that government because he didn't recruit the officers. And then again, we're looking at a plan which at the moment sees us losing 1,300 officers. So I wasn't even getting into that bit. I was just trying to ask about what's new and different about the plan. And then there seems to be a strange kind of connection to why this government is great, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about this plan. We're not talking about how this government and the Mayor are taking the officers out and not investing in the police.
Sorry, was there a question?
I'm trying again to get up. I mean, to get to the plan. I mean, I don't know, Assistant Commissioner, if you can speak directly to the plan and what is new and different in the plan.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, look, I mean, the plan's out for consultation, and to be really clear, it is the Mayor's plan, and the Met's operationally independent, and the Met, but we must obviously have due regard for the Mayor's plan. And also, we've welcomed the opportunity in advance to consult and be consulted on what was in the plan to make sure that we're aligned. I think not having it radically different isn't a bad thing. If we're looking at long-term strategy, part of the challenge in sort of setting priorities and investment over years is that if plans radically change one way or another, it often unpicks some of the work that's been done before. For us, it's also important. There's sort of two key things that come out of the plan, I think, well, three that I would draw out. One, we welcome as the Met that it's clear that MOPAC plays a role in both supporting the Met whilst also holding us to account, and I think that's really important. It's also important to remember that the draft plan's remit goes beyond policing and sets the Mayor's ambition for the wider criminal justice system as well, and that's something that we've already touched on in terms of sentencing, but some of the constraints within which we operate are driven by some of the criminal justice system and how other partners such as councils play their key roles in reducing crime. In terms of the plan, one of the things that we're pleased about is that it aligns in many areas with our new Met for London plan, specifically on significant focus on violent crime, focus on reducing robbery, commitment to tackling violence against women and girls, commitment to tackling exploitation, and commitment to a child-first approach, which follows on from our children's strategy launched in September. So there is quite a lot of alignment between what the Met is trying to do to improve through our new Met for London delivery and what is now set out in the plan. Had the plan been wildly different, that would have obviously been more difficult for us.
Thanks. And Deputy Mayor, just to come back to you quickly, you obviously are saying, I think the one thing I picked out that you said has a change perhaps from your predecessor is you have a higher focus, or you were focused more on neighbourhood policing. Is that what your main focus was? Was that what you changed and put forward in this plan?
No, I was saying that it's an evolution of that. We've been able to enable a greater focus on that because of the focus across from national to local. But I would also add that, you know, it's the prioritisation, but also the new things we've been able to enable underneath that. So the Mayor's exploitation support service is a new thing that we're rolling out and testing at the moment, as well as taking on the duty around appropriate adults as MOPAC is a new area which I think will help to strengthen and support victims and the criminal justice system.
From a personal perspective, coming into the role late last year, what was the kind of changes that you drove? What was in the plan that perhaps you wanted amended or that you kind of wanted focused on? What changes have you made?
I feel like, obviously, when I came in, a lot of the work had been done to draft the plan already. A lot of the consultation had started. I know greater consultation is happening now. But for me, what really struck me about the plan is, as a kind of relative outsider at that stage, it was the importance for us to have a clear vision of what we wanted for London, the safety of London, clear articulation across the priorities of what that might look like and how we were going to go about doing that. So that was my focus, to make sure that we had a plan that when we went out to consultation, and that's something that the consultation meetings that I've been doing so far has really struck upon, is that need for kind of if you will, ordinary Londoners to be able to see their safety within the plan and be able to see that the Mayor's priorities and their priorities align. And that's why the consultation at the moment is so important, and that we need to keep on refining that. But that was definitely my driving emphasis for the prioritise.
Okay, thanks. And we I think we've spoke previously about when we talked about this draft plan last time, about the kind of lack of emphasis of stop and search in here and how it should be done, and talk about it in general. When we had our guests come previously to talk to us about that, we had guests from Runnymede who were in favour of scrapping stop and search. Is that a position that you would take as Deputy Mayor, or do you see the importance of it?
No, that's not the position I would take. I think obviously the stop and search is a tactical tool that the Met has used for a long time that has led to significant and important arrests, especially in the area of violence. But I would say what we need to be is data-led, ethical, and it's something that actually it's been really interesting to work with the police on so far. Is the police are currently working on their stop and search charter. I think the ethos that they have been doing that in, being really community-led, really listening to the concerns of community about the tactic. I think I've heard through that and the work that MOPAC's doing through the Disproportionality Board, doing a lot of research in top spot areas of using stop and search, that we need to make sure that what's being done is, fair, proportionate, right, but is a tactic that continues to be able to be used in reducing criminality in London.
Yeah, and good to end on, I think, some agreement between both of us on that. But one thing I would come back to is that I really do hope in the final iteration of the plan it does take a bit more prominence, because it is a necessary and useful tool for the police, but not without the difficulties of the perception by some communities in London about the way it's used, or people in general. And B, with the police themselves, officers I know are concerned about implementing stop and search when they probably should, because they're concerned about the retribution or the criticisms that could come on them. So I do think it's something that perhaps there should be a bit more backing in there in the police and crime plan, and a bit more explanation about why it's important but how it should be used. That's it. Don't have to come back. That's just a plea, I suppose. Assistant Commissioner, what's the biggest challenge for the Met in terms of the expectations set out in the draft plan?
That's a good question. I think for us, our priority at the moment is around delivering New Met for London, which is about community crime fighting, changing our culture and fixing our foundations. The priorities are there to enable us to deliver the mission of more trust, less crime and higher standards. I think the points I raised in my previous answer, where there is alignment in the plan between New Met for London, are really, really helpful. But already, the New Met for London, we've delivered over 150 commitments. I don't propose to go through all of those, but it's things like working with communities to deliver new community crime plans, growing the Public Protection Command, launching the V100 to target our most dangerous VAUG offenders, launching the culture plan and the race action plan, and investing in new training. The budget is the thing that's going to sort of exercise a lot of our focus in the coming months. So if you ask me what's the biggest challenge at the moment, I think our budgetary position is going to be significantly challenging, and we can touch on that later. We have already taken decisions around deferring investment in the new physical home for learning and development, deferring investment in refurbishment of Gravesend, and there are tough choices to come. And we can't escape those, even with the additional money that's been provided by the Home Office and maybe City Hall. I think for us at the moment, New Met for London priorities, we remain committed to building the strongest ever neighbours policing. We remain committed to improving our outcomes for victim of rape and serious sexual offence and child abuse and exploitation. We remain committed to changing our culture and continue to deliver more leadership training, improved vetting processes, and deal with misconduct and complaints. We remain committed to fixing our foundations, re-examining how we deal with command and control, improved uniform and body armour, and we know that ensuring swift criminal justice outcomes for victims relies on having a strong case, so we remain committed to improving how we present that. Some of the biggest challenges we face at the moment are within the wider criminal justice system and are budgetary.
Thank you. I think you've answered my next question, which is, does the Met have the resources to deliver the plan? I think that's a no.
So,
I can read between the lines. You might not want to say it. So.
Well, we have to prioritise, right? So yeah. One of the challenges that we have is that every unit of demand that the Met deals with over the last decade has become more complicated. Everything that we do takes longer than it once did. And we're yet to see, and we are investing in, but the future of automation, artificial intelligence, and is on the horizon that may reset some of that. But at the moment, burdens placed on us from elsewhere in the system mean that everything is more complicated and takes longer for officers. We are fixing our foundations. We've just implemented a new computer system just over a year ago now, bringing together 4 legacy systems. We're in the process of replacing our command and control system, the origins of which date back to the early 80s, pre-PACE, which is in significant need of upgrade.
I think, Assistant Commissioner, just with a view to time, I'll ask again, and if you could, does the Met have the resources to deliver the plan?
So we have the resources to deliver the priorities.
To deliver the
priorities.
So do you have the
in the plan? And again, I don't want to dance on the head of a pin on it. In that the budget isn't yet finally set for this year, and we await the final settlement with MOPAC. And 2, the plan is still in draft. So at the moment, I've outlined the areas that we're going to prioritise: neighbourhoods, outcomes, culture, fixing the foundations, and things like exhibits and criminal justice. Those are our priorities. I'm confident that the investments we've made, we can deliver those, but there will be other things that we will have to do less of, and that links to the tough choices that we're looking at in terms of budget.
Okay, and obviously at the moment what we're looking at is 1,300 less officers. What is the effect of that? So
the direct effect will be in things like the tough choices we've got to make. We're going to have to reduce some, at the moment, no decisions have been made, but I think it was the Chair or Assembly Member Roberts mentioned, we've got discussions around whether we can still continue with specific royal parks. We've got areas we're looking at around support services, including horses and dogs. We're looking at some of our serious organised crime work. We're looking at a range of choices that we've got to make to be affordable. And the reason they're called tough choices is because they are tough. There's nothing that we're going to reduce that we're going to think, oh, well, we didn't need that anyway. These are things where we're going to have to reduce and then find a different way to either address the demand or actually, in reality, in some things, we're going to have to stop doing stuff. And that goes back to the point around everything becoming more complex in an environment where things take longer and everything's more complex. Reducing budget and reducing headcount means that you have to do less.
Thanks. And just finally, Chair, just for Kaya, what representations are you making to the government and Mayor around that funding?
Briefly, please.
Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I was really conscious of in the division of the draft of the plan was to have regular consultations with the Met so that we could talk openly about the affordability of the plan. So it's something we've been conscious of throughout, and obviously going through the budget process together, you know, we are really aware of the current situation with the Met, and I continue to make representations. You know, at the Engage meeting, one of the key risks that were identified by the Mayor and myself was the continued budget constraints.
Sorry, just with the government and the Mayor,
yeah,
making that representation.
So the Home Office were in the room at the Engage meeting, so that was an opportunity to raise it there. We will continue to lobby in terms of the spending review. Obviously, we're having discussions now about these tough choices internally, and a real focus on how to do the very best for London in that.
Okay, thank you. I suppose those 1,300 extra officers the Mayor promised in his manifesto, we won't be seeing those this year for sure.
I mean, I think that was a manifesto promise that we're all really keen to deliver on. We want to work together with the Home Office to make that happen. But, over having a quarter of our budget, going to having the Mayor invest 25% of the Met's budget is an important and significant...
We're not seeing the officers. That's the answer, I think. The Chair wants to move on.
I've been clear that it is a key priority for us. We're trying to make that work, but the spending review is a key part of that.
If it's a key priority, it needs to be funded. And personally, I think far more money needs to go into the Metropolitan Police at a time where the roads of the streets are far more dangerous. This is when we should be putting more money into the Metropolitan Police. Now, we've been joined today by politics students from the Thomas Tallis School in Greenwich. Welcome, everybody. It's really good to see you. Today, we've been talking about grooming gangs, and now we're talking about the draft police and crime plan. So you're very welcome. Deputy Mayor, you must forgive me. I just recalled that in a previous meeting you asked to be called Madam Deputy Mayor. Assembly Member Giorgio asked you. Do you still want to be referred to as Madam Deputy Mayor, or are you quite relaxed at being called Kaya? It was the last meeting we were at.
Chair, I always think that, I would refer to you as Chair to give you the honour of the role of your title. I'm happy for you to refer to me however you like.
OK, you specifically asked for Madam Deputy Mayor. That was why I was asking. OK, right, we're now moving on to Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. And good morning, both, by the way. It's still morning, yes. Assistant Commissioner, you mentioned earlier very specifically that the mayoral plan is the mayoral plan. Some might say that some are born with mayoral plans, some achieve mayoral plans, and some have mayoral plans thrust upon them. What involvement did the Metropolitan Police have with the development of the plan, or has it been imposed upon you?
No, I mean, so we've been very involved, and we've been grateful to MOPAC and have welcomed the opportunity to shape the draft plan and ensure that the new Met for London plan that we're working with is there's synergy between the two. If I gave the impression in any way this has been thrust upon us, that wasn't my intent. This is something that we've been very much consulted upon and had the opportunity to provide feedback on in advance before it went out to wider consultation in draft.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This has been touched upon, but just for completeness, Assistant Commissioner, what specific actions will the Met take to ensure the priorities and commitments in the draft police and crime plan are embedded across the Met, including in frontline policing?
So I think my answer to that is I need to wait until it becomes the policing and crime plan, and then our sort of statutory responsibility is to have regard to it. I'm really pleased in the work that we've done that there is alignment between the new Met for London plan and the draft policing and crime plan, which means that having regard to it should be much easier. Once it's in final format and it is the Mayor's plan, then of course I'll be able to better comment on that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbutt.
Thank you. So this committee is really interested in public order policing. It's something that we've spoken about, but it's completely absent from the plan. So as we develop our responses, I just wanted to give you some time to reflect on the policing of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign protest on the 18th of January, because I've heard from over 150 people who attended. They report violence from the police against children, pregnant women and older people. People have been arrested, have told me that they weren't given any warnings. They were just in the wrong part of the pavement, or they were asking to leave Trafalgar Square, but then they were arrested for not leaving. They felt like the police had misled them, letting them through the lines, and then we've heard the narrative that people were forced through, but there's no evidence of that. A kettling tactic was used, which is a containment tactic that's supposed to be a last resort, and I don't feel that was proportionate to the threat, and I do have questions about Section 12 and 14. So I just wondered, within this discussion about the police and crime plan, what your reflections are on that operation and how it can inform parts of trust and confidence, but also just the fact that public order policing isn't mentioned in the plan. So
I mean, I've been at this committee before talking about public order policing and the unique challenges that the Met has faced since October of 2022, when we saw the sort of significant rise in environmental-based protest and direct action through JSO and other groups. That was then sort of paled into insignificance compared to the challenge we faced following the terrorist attack in Israel in October of 2023, which has led without question to this being the busiest and the most operationally challenging period of policing public order I've ever known in my service, and I've been policing public order since the late 1990s. In sort of every role that there is, from PC to Assistant Commissioner. So it's a significant challenge. World events, what happens around the world resonates loudly on the streets of London, and representations we made to government around the National International Capital Cities grant in terms of ensuring that there's enough money to deal with the additional demands that are placed on the Met as a result of it being the capital city and having all of the embassies and having the seat of government and everything else, some of that has been met, but the gap hasn't been filled in any way. So if this is a money question, then in terms of the NIC, we've got more money from the Home Office and we're very grateful for that. It doesn't fill the demand. We know that every weekend for a long period of time we were seeing hundreds, sometimes thousands of officers needing to deal with public order issues, and in addition to that, also midweek.
But do you feel like you got it right for this one? Do you feel like it was a proportionate response, given the fact there wasn't one from the end of November, they'd been majority peaceful, this scale of arrests, the kettling, and the people being arrested for just being on the wrong part of the pavement?
So I'm not sure I recognise some of the characterisation of that. I think what I can say is that the command team worked extensively with the organisers to try and get to a route and get to a protest that didn't impact significantly and cause serious disruption to other parts of the community. And the challenge with public order policing, as everyone in the committee will know, is that it is a balance of rights. It's a balance of people's right to protest and exercise their rights under Articles 9, 10 and 11 of the Human Rights Act, equally weighed against the balance of rights to go about your normal business, and in this case specifically, the rights to go to worship
Yeah, but the arrests mainly happened in Whitehall and Trafalgar Square. They were nowhere near the BBC, which is the place that they were told that they couldn't go near. So it was more about how that the specific operation
We're
on
really
that Saturday.
talking about the police and crime plan, Zoe.
I can answer briefly. I mean, the arrests were made for breaches of the Public Order Act and conditions that were imposed. And once conditions are imposed, and we can talk about the rights and the wrongs of whether or not they were the right conditions, and whether or not those conditions are proportionate and necessary is something that anyone can challenge by means of judicial review or otherwise. There was no such challenge. And if people then breach those conditions, they are breaking the law. And I don't know. I mean, if there is a suggestion that officers have acted too hastily, have approached people and were given no warning whatsoever, then that clearly would be something we would look at. I don't believe that's the case.
Okay, I've got some evidence and I'm going to write to the Met Commissioner. So just quickly, I just asked Deputy...
As long as it's to do with the police and crime plan, which is what we're talking about
but
today.
It's not, yeah, so do you think that public order policing should be in the police and crime plan? And do you think that this specific operation should have an investigation?
Just answer very, very, very briefly, please, because this is out of this remit.
I think, obviously, public order policing is a key area of what the Met does operationally, and therefore this is a strategic plan for the priorities of London across the next 5 years. So we're not going to cover every part of the operations of the police in it. I'm conscious that you're going to submit your reflections to the draft plan, and let's take it forward that way.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The problem is the police are between a rock and a hard place. If Zoe was the rock, I would be the hard place, going completely in the opposite direction. So now we're going on to the next section, which is reducing violence and criminal exploitation. And questioning is started by Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
I'm going to start with AC Twist, if you don't mind. What progress has the Met made over the past 3 years to identify and pursue the most dangerous offenders to prevent re-offending? What has worked well and what needs more work? Of course, we have a significant gang problem in London, a lot of re-offending there. We have sexual re-offenders as well, which you mentioned earlier. So can you give us a flavour of the specific pieces of work around specific crime types?
Thank you, Lord Bailey. I will, and I think I'll start with some sort of statistics on how our performance has changed, and then touch on some of the technology that we're using to assist with that. So, you know, at the moment, as things stand today, personal robberies down 13% compared to the same period last year, residential robberies down 4%, vehicle crime volumes on a downward trajectory compared to Q3 of last year. Pleasingly, in 2024, we saw the fewest number of homicides recorded since 2014, which is, of course, still too many because each one's a tragedy, but the homicide rate is definitely going in the right direction. The Met performs very well against England and Wales and our most similar forces group, linked specifically for violence with injury. We're positioned 10th nationally, which, given we're the capital city and all of the challenges we face, that's really impressive. We also have seen a greater rate of increase in our positive outcomes compared to England and Wales and our most similar group for violence with injury. We've gone from 34th highest in the positive outcomes to 22nd out of 43 in the period between April and September 2024. We're 14th nationally out of 43 in England and Wales for rape offences, with positive outcomes at a higher rate than the England and Wales average, and our most similar forces, which again, for the capital city and all our complexity, is something we should be very proud of. In terms of moving to sort of violence against women and girls, the College and the National Police Chiefs Council now estimate that there are over 3,000 VORG, if I can use VORG as a paraphrase for violence against women and girls, VORG offences recorded each day, which is at least 1 in 12 women victims each year. Over 1 million VORG-related crimes were recorded during 2022-23, accounting for 20% of all of the work that we do. Things that we have done in relation to that, this is your thing, are things like our V100, which is a really innovative tactic that I think has just proven to be enormously successful. This is a data-led approach that identifies those posing the greatest risk to women and girls in London. It's something that we've created. The data in a tool comes from named suspects of crime rather than police intelligence, so we eliminate a lot of the issues around data integrity or disproportionality in that to get on there, you need to be a named suspect, identified by either a victim or a witness. That's then factored against the Cambridge Crime Harm Index and used to measure the seriousness of harm based on how recently the offences have occurred and how frequently the offender has been named. To give some idea of the statistics, we think of the V100, but since the end of December 2020, as at the end of December, since implementation, we had 93 suspects who were convicted since becoming a V100 nominal, and 39 of those were for VORG offences. We've had 112 charged, with a total of 530 offences. 58 of the suspects were charged with VORG offences, including 31 rapes, 11 GBHs, 19 non-fatal strangulations and 1 attempted murder. And we've had 133 suspects arrested for a total of 1,162 offences. 87 suspects were arrested for VORG, 38 of which were rape, 17 for GBH and 13 for non-fatal strangulation. So that gives an idea as to how our precise targeting of those offenders who are the most dangerous to women and girls in London is having a really excellent impact. And whilst there's always more to do, it's something that it goes back to resources, but where you have finite resources and almost infinite demand, you have to be precise, and this is a really good way that we're doing that.
Thank you. Let me just quickly focus your mind on a different type of crime. The street-based crime, violent crime, what are your tactics around there? Because the boys who mainly suffer from that kind of crime, I'm referring to black boys such as myself, we're not vogue, we're not the flavour of the month, we're not what people seem to care about, but we are the ones who are most certainly murdered, for instance. So what particular tactics are you focusing on there to cut down that type of crime?
Yeah. The Commissioner mentioned this in a piece recently. It shames us all, the level of stabbing and homicides amongst young black boys in London. That isn't something that is okay, and it's something that we need to do more about, and we need to talk more about openly. I mean, there are a number of drivers for this. So we've touched on county lines, but also mobile phones offences. We're seeing significant challenges with a number of gangs that are stealing mobile phones in London. It's something that I know the public are worried about. And last week, we were spent some time really focusing on that, looking at wanted offenders, exercising search warrants in targeting premises, buying, selling and handling stolen smartphones, gathering intelligence through the use of IMEI checks, checking at second-hand retailers, searching for stolen phones, and working in partnership with other agencies, including the NCA, City of London, BTP. The results there, preliminary data, we executed 23 search warrants, made 230 arrests for 539 offences and recovered over 1,000 stolen smartphones. So some really good results in 1 week of activity, which then leads us to other avenues of investigation, including those groups that are handling these phones and then shipping them on at quite an industrial scale. You talk about street-based violence. This is one of the things. Robbery and knife-enabled robbery is something that forms part of the plan. It is something that's in New Met for London. It is something we're focused on. And actually, dealing with mobile phone theft is, really very important. The sad thing with it, in terms of mobile phone theft, is that I very much think this is something where designing out the crime would be much more effective. Those of us, the students in the room certainly won't remember this, but those of us that are old enough to remember how vehicle manufacturers designed out the ability to steal car radios in the late 80s and early 90s by making them integrated. Mobile phone providers could design out this crime by removing the second-hand market for mobile phones, by not allowing them to be reactivated onto the network again. Our initial evidence shows, based on a small snapshot of phones that are stolen, the majority get reactivated, often in other countries. And if that wasn't able to happen, the market will fall out of it.
Yeah, it would affect the business model, and that's what drives the crime. Let me quickly, thank you for those answers, AC Twist. Let me quickly ask the Deputy Mayor, Madam Deputy Mayor, 2 questions. Firstly, there's a feeling amongst some of our partner organisations that some of the initiatives around violence against women and girls are flavour of the month and lack consistency. Is that a characterisation you would recognise?
No, To answer, sorry, could you clarify what you mean by lack consistency?
So some of the organisations feel that pieces of work in Vogue are funded because they're the latest thing, they're new, nobody's evaluating them, nobody's seeing if they're effective. And if you come up with something that's new, flavour of the month, that is far more likely to be funded, supported than something that has been going along for a while and work. And before you answer that, I would point out that one of the ongoing problems for MOPAC has been KPIs, evaluating work. And the two things sometimes feel linked to me.
I do not recognise that characterisation at all. I know that MOPAC have commissioned Vogue services significantly and consistently for a long period of time. We actually just did a review with the sector to hear how we could commission better for the sector, and have got some really important data from that which will be reflected in the upcoming Vogue strategy. I mean, only this week was I told that the evaluation, I was at a meeting about harmful practices around girls, that the evaluation is fair, robust, important for the work that they do, to evidence work to other funders. So I really do not recognise that characterisation.
Okay, thank you. And Red, last tiny question. Has the Mayor been involved in the conversation about designing out the crime around mobile phones? Absolutely.
He's already held a round table with phone providers. It's something he's really deeply passionate about. We've been to 2 Home Office meetings about knife-enabled robbery, where the Mayor was very clear that he feels that phone providers has a real role to play in this. I've actually been approached this week by a phone provider saying they want to do more in this space, and that's something that we're actively taking up.
Thank you. We'd like, through you, Chair, we'd like to get some more visibility on that, because if we could remove the phone thing, it would destroy the business model, and that would reduce street crime.
We strongly agree, so happy to do that.
Absolutely. Well, we can work together on that. Just for clarity on something Lord Bailey said, the quote was actually from Professor Jyoti Balleur. She actually said, some of the things in the area of Vogue has been quite a bit of flavour of the month. That's her quote. She says, today this is important. A lot of resources are put into it and something seems to be working well. Yet tomorrow somebody else comes in and it's not that important anymore. In other words, she was saying that something, as my colleague said, is the flavour of the month. Resource and everything is put into it, and then suddenly something else comes along and that resource is removed. So just for clarity, Jyoti Balleur, Professor. So we'll, just so you know where it came from. Actually, bearing in mind we're looking at the police and crime plan, in some of the meetings we've had, Madam Deputy Mayor, might be worth your looking at, because it's people from lots of different areas giving their view on how the plan should go. Assembly Member Garbett, did you still want to come in? Yep.
Just a brief one. The police crime plan takes a public health approach. Like that's a theme that runs through the whole plan. So, as Assistant Commissioner, I just wondered what that meant to you and the Met, and what steps are being taken for a public health approach to be taken across policing.
So, I think that's probably not a question for policing. I think the public health approach is a question for partners. It's a question for groups like the VRU. The public health approach in Scotland was based on their violence reduction unit, not on the police. In cases where you're dealing with serious crime, where you're dealing with knife crime, often involving children, by the time the police, we're picking up the pieces. It's the system, it's the education, housing, social, employment, all of the other agencies, all of those that are involved in that person's life. If it gets to policing, it's kind of already a little bit too late. So in terms of public health approach, that isn't something that I don't think the police would lead on. I think that's something the partners would lead on, and we would very much lead in and support in any way that was
Would you describe right care, right person as a public health approach?
So I would describe right care, right person as absolutely critical in terms of ensuring that for health emergencies, it is the right agency that's taking the lead. And I think we may have discussed this here before, but happy to at a future occasion, around how the police had stepped into at a sort of macro and industrial level areas where actually others had stepped back from, which meant that actually the police were doing less police work and doing more work around dealing with someone's health. It is not sensible or appropriate that police are first responders to a health emergency. Obviously, in cases where people have been stabbed or seriously injured, of course police will turn up. But what we found was over a period of time, police officers were spending more and more time dealing with mental health emergencies, which meant that they had less and less time to deal with our core responsibilities, which are the prevention and detection of crime.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm getting to. Like, how can we make sure that we're taking that approach across police activity, things like in schools, drug policing, you know, just thinking about if the police are the right agency to be responding, but that's what the right care up person approach and the public health approach takes.
And I think that's something increasingly we're going to need to look at, and we are looking at, apart from where else are officers stepping into actually areas where they're probably not the right people to be leading, whether that's in schools or in healthcare settings. And where else do we need others to step in to discharge their core responsibilities, so in a smaller organisation we can focus more precisely on those things that only we can do.
Great, that's good to hear.
I'd just like to say right care, right person was absolutely the right thing to do. I've witnessed...
Agree, totally agree.
Yeah, no, good. I've witnessed so many police officers, their entire shifts being spent in hospitals waiting for somebody to take over from them. So absolutely applaud that. Madam Deputy Mayor, will MOPAC conduct a public consultation on the refreshed VORG strategy? What will this involve, and what is the specific time frame for this?
On timeframes, Assembly Member Hall Chair, we would like to take the next few months. We've already started the work to really review what we're doing in VORG. I'm hoping that the strategy will be published by the end of summer. It's really important that we make sure that in all areas of VORG we're getting the right mix, the right approach, the right frameworks to support this really important sector. We know that VORG is at epidemic levels globally, and it's something that we can't take off the ground. For me, it's a real mix of prevention around investing in perpetrator work, support for victims, you know, supporting the partnership approach that we have with the Metropolitan Police and the work that they've been doing to tackle this issue straight on, and also making sure that the criminal justice system is improving to support victims.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've missed out the main bit I was really asking. Must be my fault. Are you going to conduct a public consultation on that strategy? You definitely are.
Yes.
Good. Any idea when that will go out?
I know that we want to conclude the work from summer, and I know that we've already started the work with organisations that we commission. So I think that it's all in train. I think the team are focusing right now on a consultation for the police and crime plan, and as soon as that is closed and settled, then we'll move on to working on the VORG strategy.
Okay. Matt, how is the Met working to build trust and confidence among victims and survivors of VORG? What has been the impact of this work? What are the next steps? And I'd like to say I think there's been an incredible amount of good work gone here. I didn't realise it was as much as 20% of the work that you do. I didn't realise that.
So, I mean, the Met's dedicated to putting victim survivors of rape at the heart of everything we do to eradicate sexual violence largely caused by predatory men, and to support those who are impacted. And we've transformed the way we investigate rape and sexual offences, more than doubling our number of rape charges since 2001. There's more to do, and actually we've gone beyond that already this year as a result of the investment. I think one of the key things was becoming a pilot site for Operation Soteria, the national project aimed at transforming the way that police respond to and investigate serious sexual offences and rape. And during the time, we've helped inform the national operating model, provided recommendations on how other police forces could better deal with these offences and bring more predatory men to justice and improve outcomes for victims and survivors. I think the lessons that we have learned, the things that I would draw out here are we have specialist rape and serious sexual offences teams, which are part of our public protection strand on every BCU. Through the rollout of specialist training and central governance, we're ensuring that all other units that investigate RASO, including specialist crime, where we do see some offences cropping up, also included in the implementation of Ops Soteria approach. We're demonstrating our commitment to public protection. The uplift that we've seen and I've touched on already has been significant and has assisted officers in creating manageable workloads. I've mentioned the V100, I won't touch on that again, but ensuring there's a victim-centred approach with zero tolerance of victim-blaming language, which was something that the HMI commented specifically on how we had improved from previous inspections to when we had the mini-inspection just before Christmas, was really important, and embedding the core Soteria principle of procedural justice to ensure victims are treated with fairness and respect. I think ongoing work to work with partners, ensure victims and survivors are supported throughout the whole process and are signposted to specialist services, including independent sexual violence advisors, and additional MOPAC surge funding to improve the timeliness of investigations and judicial outcomes. We've invested an additional £11 million in digital forensics to improve the way we handle digital evidence from devices such as phones and laptops from victims. And we continue to work with multi-agency scrutiny panels and others to check that the decisions we take where we have got to no further action are right and ensure the focus is on actions of the suspected offenders rather than the victims themselves. So I think we've transformed our approach in recent past as a result of the Soteria principles, and it's good to see that all forces in England and Wales are now committed to implementing the national operating model during this year.
Excellent. Can I pick up on a couple of things? Information off phones. When I went to see a team working, granted it must have been about 4 or 5 years ago, they said the biggest problem they had, or one of the problems they had, I should say, was actually getting information off the phones. It took weeks and weeks and weeks. What's the sort of time frame around getting that digital information?
So there's a number of variables to it. We've introduced kiosks which enable very quick triage of phones, and also technology that enables us to be much more precise. So maybe 5 or 6 years ago we were trying to download the whole thing, and
that's exactly what you were doing.
And that was something that clearly victims felt was overly intrusive, and was something that we should, at the time maybe that's what we had to do, but now we've got much more precise about narrowing down exactly what might be needed if it formed part of a defence, but not doing this as a matter of course, doing it when needed. Phones and technology is one of the points I made earlier in terms of every offence now has a digital footprint almost. Yeah. Offences of burglary or robbery, as well as much more complex offences like sexual violence, have a digital footprint, and so this generates a huge demand. So we're constantly battling to keep up with the technology, but there are tools that are coming that assist with that. How quick the digital download takes depends on a range of factors, some of which are operationally sensitive, some of which not. But clearly, if we've got access to the phone at the start point, that makes things a lot easier.
Okay, thank you. I was talking to a detective recently, and he said that the caseloads are horrific. How many caseloads would each detective approximately have? Very approximately, I understand.
So it depends. A couple of years ago, we were looking at sort of 30 to 50 for sort of rape investigators. That's now down below 20 on average. So we've made significant differences. That's one of the first questions I ask whenever I go into a public protection unit and a RASO team. How big is your caseload? And I think the number itself isn't the only thing to consider. It depends on the status of the...
I get that.
Complexity, and also the stage of the process, because now one of the challenges that we've got, and one of the things I was going to mention, is that, in order to improve VAUG performance, this needs to be a whole system approach, because, at the moment, looking at the wider criminal justice system, it takes about 45 days from receiving an offence to getting a charge. Court backlogs mean that we're currently seeing cases slated for 2028.
I know.
So if you've got a victim that you're trying to keep on side for 4 years, that's a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of work, and also points to some of the reason why we have an attrition rate in this area.
No, I understand. I was going to bring that up. So can you confirm to me that these RASO officers aren't constantly being taken away, so somebody else has to keep picking up, because that's the vibe I was getting. You're telling me that's not right.
No, so if that was the case, my understanding is it isn't now. Our VASO officers are specially trained. We have them in the teams, and we're not abstracting them for sort of, I don't know, aid in central London or something like that. Aside from perhaps maybe the officers may end up on supporting crime investigations for our largest events. I'm thinking Notting Hill Carnival, but that would be about it.
OK, thank you very much for that. We're now going over to Assembly Member Moena.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question is, excuse me, to the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. How will the Police and Crime Plan tackle the online dimension of hate crime and extremism?
Thank you. I think that's a really important question. I think we all know that the online space is something that we should be greatly concerned about, and similarly to what we were talking about phone crimes, I do believe social media companies really need to be held to account in this area, and the government is working on the online harm bill at the moment, and I think, the Prime Minister has strongly reinforced the need to get especially children and young people safe from the amount of harm and violence being spread on the internet. So we need to do all we can in this space. I don't think that there's, AC Twist will be able to, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there's a type of crime at the moment not enabled by some sort of online issues. So it is something that I know we're talking to the National Association of Police and Crime about, that the online harm bill will be putting in significant submission to, but it is something we need to be conscious of in every element of the Police and Crime Plan.
So online offending's really, really concerning. There's a number of facets to it, whether it's driving polarisation in society or driving misinformation, or whether it's enabling offences that have always happened, whether that's sort of fraud, theft, deception, enabling it at a truly industrial scale. It's also connecting, in the case of examples specifically around, say, child abuse. The online space enables those who previously would never have been connected with each other to connect with each other more quickly on the dark web and exchange horrific, indecent images and other things. We work significantly both in the overt and covert space to seek to disrupt that. There is more we can do, but this isn't something police can solve on its own, because, as Kai has mentioned and as I touched on earlier, there almost isn't any criminal footprint now that doesn't have some sort of online space. Even if you think about an assault in a pub on a Friday night, how could that have an online space? Well, until the evidence has been posted by somebody on social media. And so everything we do now is into this sort of area. But there's a huge amount of volume, particularly in fraud, particularly in sexual offences and indecent images, that is, and extortion, that is now enabled online, that once previously would have been much harder for the suspects to undertake.
Okay. Thank you both for that. So it's lost on nobody in this country right now, the really horrific incidents of the Southport murders that took place and the loss of life of 3 young girls. And there is obviously a lot that will come out of a review of what happened or didn't happen in relation to police, Prevent and other partners. But I wanted to ask you, maybe starting with AC Twist, under the previous commissioner, I had questions about the role of, you may not like the word, but kind of incel extremism, and those boys and men that are self-radicalised by online content. And I just wondered if you feel that the Metropolitan Police are equipped to deal with kind of some of that preemptive work before a crime is committed, because obviously it is good that police are able to show up and address a situation as a crime is being committed, but we are potentially facing as I say, boys and young men kind of self-radicalising, and there's obviously a large element of misogyny in that.
Thank you. I think this touches on a number of areas, doesn't it? This is what we're talking about here is extremist material that falls short of terrorist or falls short of itself being a criminal offence. And we know that the government has announced a review looking at this following the most awful tragedy in Southport and the most awful offending, which you've mentioned. This goes back to, as well, the globalised nature of some of the online offending and connect, as I said in my previous answer, people's ability to connect with each other across the world who may either share those views or where we actually do see others deliberately seeking to radicalise the vulnerable and to target the vulnerable, and to, whether that's in other states, whether that's people who are mentally unwell, who are looking to target people in this country. It's a really massive challenge for, I think, the whole of society and the international community. This isn't something that the Met can deal with on its own. I think on the specific case of Southport, we know just how awful that is, and there's been a lot of commentary, and the Home Secretary's made statements about it, so I'm not going to sort of dwell on that here, other than to say that we will support as much as we possibly can in any sort of measures or any review that is being undertaken.
Thank you. So a former colleague of yours, Assistant Commissioner Twist, Neil Basu, was the former head of counter-terrorism. He suggested an equivalent scheme to tackling those people obsessed with extreme violence, equivalent to Prevent, or kind of running alongside it. I wonder if anything good can come out of this situation, it is that Prevent does prevent those people that don't already have a label attached to them. And I wonder what your views are on that, whether that, obviously you've talked about budgetary constraints and the upcoming budget, but if in principle that is something that policing as a whole, but also the Met here in London, would consider in light of these really awful incidents.
So I think this needs to be, and again, Neil's extremely well placed, having been Assistant Commissioner of Specialist Operations for a number of years, to have a view on this. This is something that needs to be considered as a national response, and also if we are going to go down that path with national funding to underpin it. It is deeply concerning, isn't it? We've seen how incel motivation led to attacks in the sort of south of England. We've seen how violence has become sort of almost radicalising of itself, and people are sort of taking action because they are radicalised to be violent without any sort of traditional terrorist ideology or something that we would recognise. And that's deeply concerning. So I think this is a national issue. It's one that, you know, we will wait to see the outcome of the review. I think it is something that if we are going to do, we need to be really clear. It needs to come with funding, or we need to be doing less of something else. I think that's important as well. But it is definitely an important issue. It's definitely one we want to help address.
Okay, and my final question, Chair. Just noting that the Police and Crime Plan in its draft doesn't mention incels, how will the Police and Crime Plan seek to deal with boys and men radicalised by online materials?
May I, Chair? Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think it's really important, and I think the discussion is, you know, obviously timely. And I want to put on record my condolences to the families of the little girls murdered in Southport. I think you're right that what we're seeing is, you know, a really important issue, especially if we think about the post-pandemic generation of young people, more isolated, more on their phones than ever, on their devices more than ever. I think it's really important that we do think about in the round around young people, especially. Like, the Mayor has done an amazing job in funding the Shared Endeavour Fund that has funded over 100 projects on counter-extremism and counter-terrorism. He's also done a hell of a lot of positive work in males' roles in violence against women and girls through the Have a Mate campaign and others, and making sure schools have toolkits to tackle these important issues around misogynistic issues, and I know it's a priority as well for the Metropolitan Police on the back of the Casey review. but we must continue to do that. And I think the work around mentorships, around positive role models, around connection in communities is really, really important in this space. The more positive interventions we have around young men in particular is important. So I think, you know, it's right that the work has been prioritised, especially in relation to women and girls in VAUG, and the counter-extremism work we're doing. But I hope that, you know, as you said, through this horrible tragedy, that the review work that's happening around prevent, around counter-extremism, holds this issue around incel a bit more in focus, and we get legislation to do more and support, as AC Twist has said, and funding to do more around this particular issue of incel and misogyny.
Thank you. I know it's very exciting for us to have a police somebody from the Metropolitan Police here, but we must keep our questions to the police and crime plan. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. The former Home Secretary curtailed the use of non-hate crime incidents. Obviously, we've all seen the dossier leaked yesterday that the Home Secretary is considering revitalising this measure. Deputy Mayor, is this something that you would be interested in integrating into the police and crime plan?
Sorry, can you be specific on what you're suggesting we integrate?
I'm asking your opinion on non-crime hate incidents and whether that's something that, when you look, and a lot of those are registered against things that have happened online. So I'm asking, is that something that you would be looking to put into the police and crime plan?
I think it's,
is it something you're supportive of?
I think it's important that we allow the government to review and do the work necessary to get this right. I don't think it's right that we speculate on leaks, and I think it's right that the Home Office has the time to conclude all of the evidence, and we'll take forward the recommendations of that when it's through and legislated for.
So do you have a view?
I mean, I think once that has come through, that we need to review that and, you know, make sure that the work we've done is either in line with that, and if it's not, how we prioritise that going forward.
Okay, because obviously if this is something that was integrated into the plan and the way in which the Met wants to tackle online dimensions of hate crime, obviously there's been a lot of concern about how it's been used previously. And in the dossier that's been leaked from the Home Office, they referred to that concern as an extreme right-wing narrative. Is that something you recognise, or do you see the legitimate concerns people have had?
I think it's really important that we centre the victims of, you know, abuse in this, and we do all we can to support them. And I think I don't want to leap on leaks and baseless things at the moment. I think, as I said, it's really important that that work goes through in its fullness, that we have a mature conversation about how best to prevent harm and violence and abuse in this space, because it's important.
But that wasn't the question I asked you. And the thing is, if the work is going to go forward, it's going to have to include recognising people's very serious concerns with how non-crime hate incidents were recorded previously and the damage that that could do to people's reputation. So do you recognise that there are concerns with this, or do you dismiss them as extreme far-right narratives?
Assembly Member Best, I don't think that, you know, an adult of all good conscience would ever dismiss a concern, especially in this space. But I think it's really important, as someone from a minoritized community, that I also recognise that, you know, microaggressions, the damage that, you know, things that you can see as minor things that might not be seen as a criminal act. You know, what we've seen in the misogyny space of how men leer, how, you know, it's all important. So I think what's really important is that we have that review and take back the evidence and make sure that those concerns are not dismissed either way, and get a balanced approach to taking it forward.
Okay, because obviously this refers as well to that two-tier policing that, again, this is what was in the dossier, that it's been suggested the non-crime hate incidents relate to two-tier policing, but you yourself picked up on it earlier, and it's something I've said, it's not, the two-tier policing is sometimes misleading because what people are angry about is the sentencing, right? So when it comes to things like tweets and people going to prison for tweets, and that people comparing that to the sentences people receive for extreme sexual violence, that's why people are angry. So I'm really glad earlier you were talking about the review that you sent, the evidence you sent off into references sentencing. But I'd really just hope in terms of looking at non-crime hate incidents and in the board not dismissing people's genuine concerns as extreme far right is a plea that I would make.
Okay. I think you heard that, and the plea I would make is if you're going to start making non-crime hate crimes a thing, you better make sure you put enough money into the Met to deal with it, because they've got to deal with real crime, in my view. We're now going on to increasing trust and confidence, and I'm going back to Assembly Member Best. Question 14.
Yes, thanks. The draft police and crime plan states that it will build trust through greater transparency and accountability, contributing to a fairer, more transparent, accountable system. What does a fairer, more transparent, accountable system look like, and how will it increase trust and confidence?
Thank you, Assembly Member Best. Yes, I think it's really important that, through the work we're doing in partnerships with communities, the work that we're doing in work with the police at every level, that trust and confidence is something that is a live conversation on. MOPAC has been doing a lot of work in this area. Obviously, the crime survey work we do to understand current levels of trust and confidence within the police, how that is nuanced around different characteristic types, but also how the police is responding to that, the work that the police have been doing out in communities, the pilots we've been doing in places like Hackney to have community scrutiny review panels, the work that obviously we do here in terms of oversight, and also the legislation that is coming forward on accountability. So it's really, as the plan lays out, it's really important that we're at all levels are focused on making sure that trust and confidence is at the forefront of what we're doing.
So again, slightly similar to my earlier question, Deputy Mayor, what is different in the approach to trust and confidence in this plan to the previous iteration?
I think, and I don't think that it's wrong that it's not wildly different, because I think the work that we're seeing is working. I think the stats hold up to that. I think we know as well that trust and confidence in the police is stabilising, which is actually, significant given where we were. I think we know that in some communities, I met before Christmas with the LGBTQ plus representative committee, that there's a lot of work further to be done in that area. The Victim Commissioner's here now, and I know that she'll be talking about the important work that we're doing to improve victim trust and confidence in the police. So, and that's reiterated in the plan as well. So I don't think it's, we don't want to, what we're doing is working. The approach that we're devising in specific area, the work we've done on LRAP, the work we've done on children, these are significant areas, and given where we were, we can see through the HMIC report that those are taking hold and improving, and we need to continue on that path.
So do you characterise the Met's work and the previous plan's work on trust and confidence as a success?
I think it's really, I think it's important that the plans that we have, the plans that have been shown to be working, the level of concern we have. You know, this is why we do this work. That's why it's independently reviewed. This is why we're evidence-led. We have those statistics show that there are green shoots of improvement, and that's why we want to build on it and continue. But I don't think it's right to have either way at this stage, because there is more work to be done.
Sorry, I think it is an either way. Would you characterise the previous plan's approach to trust and confidence as a success?
I think it laid very strong foundations that are showing to be proving to work, and I'm conscious that Matt wants to come in on this as well, but I think we need to recognise, especially given where we were and the levels of harm that certain communities feel, that there is more work to do.
So you would characterise it as a success because you think it successfully built strong foundations?
Yes.
Yeah, I think people would disagree with you. Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. The point, what I'd like to say is sort of three elements to this around building trust and confidence. In a context where trust and confidence in the entirety of the state and state institutions is eroding, we have, as the Deputy Mayor said, stabilised. But it was from a concerning position. I understand the sort of jeopardy that we were in, and that's why the Commissioner, when coming into post, made it very clear that we needed to deliver a new Met for London to, really safeguard the whole concept of policing by consent, because without that, without urgent action, that whole concept was in jeopardy. Three things: standards, culture and accountability system for me in terms of building trust and confidence. In terms of standards, we have been, in the last 2.5 years, absolutely vigorous in removing those who are corrupt and abusive. We have taken significant forward steps ahead of other national police forces in things like Onyx and Op Ashore, and also made it easier for officers and staff and the public to report wrongdoing through things like Crime Stoppers Hotline and internal measures. Op Ashore is really important because we all know, and there's sort of people say, well, you must have seen, you must have joined up the dots, you must have known this person shouldn't have been an officer. But with the regulatory system that we've got and the regulations, it made it very hard. But through going through Op Ashore with prioritised vetting reviews for serving officers and staff, where we hold our adverse information, it means that in 107 cases we've withdrawn people's vetting. 86 officers have exited the Met, either through dismissals, retirement or resignations, while the Operation Ashore process was underway. 19 of them resigned before their gross incompetence hearing. 19 officers and staff have been dismissed through gross incompetence hearings. 82 have had their vetting retained, which is important because it shows some balance. But we all have seen the catastrophic cases where we're often accused of failing to join the dots regarding an officer's conduct, the signs, the signals, the sort of reports that ended up being no further actioned, but taken together, we're really worried. And for me, Op Ashore is what joining the dots looks like. It's worth this committee knowing, though, that at the moment we're in the process of being judicially reviewed on this. And if we lose the judicial review, we could be in the most horrific situation where we as the Met are being forced to employ people who we don't think are suitable to serve in the office of constable. And that is deeply concerning. The final point I'll make is on culture. So this is something, you don't fix culture in the short term in a matter of days or weeks. This is something that takes years, but we've made some strong steps in terms of being a reforming Met, creating a culture that tackles discrimination, is open, diverse and upholds the standards and values we would all expect. To give you a sense of it, we've invested in staff development through 2.5 dedicated days of training for 32,000 colleagues on New Met for London, much of which focuses on culture, diversity and inclusion and our values. We've invested in more trauma support training and peer-based training, which is both peer-based and professional, because policing is a tough job. If you deal with some of the stuff that people deal with on a day-to-day basis, you can get desensitised. That can impact culture. And also our values and guiding principles are being embedded across our promotion and lateral development selection procedures, and also just in how we approach things like big events, how we resource stuff. the principles are sort of driving that. So I think we are making a difference. Again, I would never say that we are perfect. We are there. It is done. But in the last 2.5 years, we've taken some significant steps
Assistant
towards...
Commissioner, I'm really sorry. I regret that. I think that was a lot of what you were saying in the answer was correct. But I think the simplest reason why trust and confidence has fallen in the police is because people think if I get robbed, nobody's going to turn up. If someone burgles me, no one's going to turn up. If someone breaks into my car, no one's going to turn up. If I get mugged, nobody's going to come and help me. If my shop gets robbed, no one's going to come and arrest who that was. You know, if I suffer an even worse horrific sexual crime, I'm not going to get the support and nobody's going to get arrested. The sanction detection rate is terrible, and I regret that we don't have time, but that is, I think, the predominant reason why the public in London don't trust the police.
Have I got time to...
Briefly.
So, our performance in volume crime needs to be better. I think I've made the case already that in terms of serious sexual offending and others, we are doing significantly better. We know that people are concerned. We now attend over 93% of burglaries. Our intention is to attend 100% in terms of our response. We are getting better at dealing with robberies. We do have the strongest ever neighbourhood policing offer, but that's in the early stages of sort of, we won't see the success of that yet. The designs that we're doing from April will really focus on how we can do better, how we can focus on the solvable crime, because I think that's really important. We should really try and focus on solving the solvable crime. There are lots of examples where we haven't done that, and we need to be better at that, and that is absolutely what I intend to do.
So, and could I suggest maybe in future that is what we should focus on in the first answer, because solving crime, being there when people need them, that is the predominant reason people would have trust and confidence in the police.
I'm happy to. I was addressing some of the issues that had come out of Casey and various HMRC reports, but I agree core performance is actually the thing that will give people trust that we can do our core job.
Yep, and we must have trust and confidence in our police. Colleagues, we are running behind, and guests, so if we can keep things a lot sharper. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. To both of you, what specific steps will MOPAC and the Met take to work jointly with communities to co-design and build a new model for police scrutiny? You've touched on the pilot in Hackney, which is really welcome, but others as well. And just really to touch on what it means in practice and when these plans will be in place.
Thank you. Yes, I know that in November 2020 there was MOPAC commissioned a kind of overhaul of the existing community scrutiny mechanisms to make it more representative of communities and make it more transparent. We've worked in depth with particular communities, so Black Londoners, to provide recommendations on taking issues forward in regards to their concerns, and over 1,400 Londoners participated in that. So it is an illustration of that work taking forward, but we need to continue to do that. And you mentioned Hackney Community Pilot, but there's also work we're commissioning to have better kind of online tools for people to support that on the back of the OWL app that was previously out in communities. We're now devising a better system to improve that community. And then obviously I think, through the neighbourhood policing plans, making sure that there is regular ways for communities to, know who their local police are. That's been a consistent challenge, but also be clear on that local accountability. So it's definitely something that we are looking for the evaluation through the Hackney pilot and looking at ways that we can expand on that community transparency. Matt, did you want to?
No, I agree with that. I mean, clearly, the government have been very clear in the importance of local officers and neighbourhood policing, which is the sort of bedrock of how we will do this. I think, as Kaya's mentioned, we're working with MOPAC around what at the moment, community scrutiny is sort of a slightly mixed approach across different parts of London. Some of it's done through Safer Neighbourhood Board, some of it's done through police encounter panels, and some through community monitoring groups. We're looking at ways in which we could bring that together into a more consistent form of scrutiny. But we are doing more of this now than we previously have done, I think would be where I'd finish on that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thanks. So at our last meeting, our last committee, we heard that there are no opportunities for deaf and disabled Londoners to input into the London Policing Board or the Disproportionality Board, because we were talking quite a lot about intersectionality. So we had someone from Inclusion London speaking. So just as Deputy Mayor, I wondered how MOPAC were thinking of addressing that concern.
Thank you. Absolutely, and it's really, I visited the Victims Forum last week, and there was a representative from the disability community there, so it's a really important, obviously, part of our work in London. Also, actually, one of the first groups that we consulted through the police and crime plan were disabled and deaf Londoners. So it is definitely a priority, and a priority that I know, working with Deputy Mayor Weeks Bernard, we continue to focus on through Disproportionality Board and other spaces. But we know that 73% of victims lack confidence in reporting crime are from the disabled community, and we need to make sure that we're doing better for them and with them. So it will continue to be a real priority for us, and we need to find ways to more actively engage with them.
Great. Do you think that could be through the London Policing Board or the Disproportionality Board in some way to have a stronger link with disabled Londoners?
Yes, in short, I think that we can think about how we take that forward in our future plan. Like the work we've done on the LRAP is important, but we need to make sure that we're getting that right for all communities. The Casey review didn't talk about just one area of concern. It talked about misogyny. It talked about disability, hate crimes. So we need to make sure LGBTQ+ communities. We need to make sure that we're getting it right in the round for all Londoners.
Great. I know we've shortened time, so I'll go back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned the OWL system. I do hope the replacement for that comes quickly, because there are so many very, very disappointed Londoners out there that were volunteering and are very, very cross. We're now going over to talk about neighbourhood policing. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. The question for the Assistant Commissioner: in what ways is the Mayor working with the Met to build partnerships and make neighbourhoods safer, including efforts to reduce neighbourhood crime and antisocial behaviour?
Thank you. Well, if I start, our new neighbourhood model has been bolstered by an additional 500 staff. We now have a superintendent on every borough, additional officers and PCSOs working closer than ever with communities to understand their concerns. We've instigated bespoke community crime fighting plans for each area. We've audited borough command units, and 93% of them now have active problem-solving plans supported by local crime-fighting priorities. We've successfully piloted volume crime teams across 2 BCUs and going to roll those out. And taking a multi-agency approach to fighting crime in communities through Clear Hole Build has been enormously important. And the Clear Hole Build results, and I can touch more on that if there's time, but we've achieved 645 disruptions, seized £112,000 of cash, 157 instances of Class A drugs being seized, and 13 firearms. So also audits are showing we're better recording antisocial behaviour, audit panels taking place bi-monthly, and the latest indicated that 87% audited over the last 12 months have correctly recorded personal antisocial behaviour, which is a significant improvement from where we are. But I think the Clear Hole Build is the biggest thing that we are doing, and potentially the most significant difference that we can make.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall, the Chair touched on this earlier with the Royal Parks Police, but do you think that a reduction in dog units, mounted units, forensics, flying squads, armed response and the Royal Parks Police will make the job of community policing easier or harder?
No, so I think I've been very clear that we're calling these tough choices because they're tough. These are things we would prefer not to do, but we have to live within our means, and so are having to make these tough choices. Which ones actually we have to implement will be determined in the final budget settlement, which we won't know until, I think, the start of March. So, of course, this is going to make it harder when our ambition would actually be to grow in order to meet the demand, not to reduce, but that's the budgetary position we're faced with.
OK, the rural parks in particular take up 5,000 acres of the capital, 3,600 for Bushey and Richmond alone. Are you concerned that there's potential for an increase in crime, antisocial behaviour in these neighbourhoods?
So
if
the
rural
Royal
parks are
Parks
removed. Sorry, I should say.
So, again, the decision's yet to be made, and as the Chair mentioned, I've got a meeting with the Chair of the Royal Parks later this week. It is one of the tough choices we're considering, and if we do have to remove those posts, then the local neighbourhood teams will need to step more into the space of policing that geography. The Royal Parks do sit within ward boundaries, they do sit within geography of London, where we have neighbourhood provision. Of course, you know, these choices are tough, and when weighed against other things we might have to reduce, it could be that it's felt that Royal Parks, for example, is something that we can no longer afford.
Yeah, the one concern I have is that whilst it's quite easy for neighbourhood police, safer neighbourhood teams, to recognise an individual road, an individual avenue, an individual cul-de-sac within their patch, the topography of the rural parks is quite distinct and relies on specialist knowledge of the geography. Would you agree with that?
So I think one of the distinctions, also the number of events that goes on in different parts of the Royal Parks, is something that we would have to consider, and if we do need to make this tough choice, we'll need to look at how we can best mitigate those risks.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thanks. Very clear. Sorry. Question for the Deputy Mayor. Top of the shop of the Mayor's policing manifesto was the delivery of a further 1,300 more neighbourhood police officers and PCSOs during the police and crime plan. Will they be delivered?
I think, as I previously mentioned, it's definitely a priority for us because we're so passionate about making sure that neighbourhood policing, community policing and visible policing is something we want to do. And so working through the budget with the Met and the Home Office, we've made that clear. The numbers of police officers, as I've discussed previously in this committee, is something that we're conscious of. I know Assembly Member Duval, we were talking passionately about the flexibility in funding, you know, civilianisation, so we can move more officers into the front line. I think we're all clear that we want more officers in neighbourhoods, and we're working as hard as we can to get there. And I know that the Mayor has, you know, invested personally out of the budget to make sure that, you know, PCSOs and officers are prioritised in that, and we continue to work through the spending review to make sure that hopefully we can get to a positive place on numbers.
You'll forgive me if I note that you didn't actually answer the question. The manifesto commitment was very clear that there will be 1,300 additional officers, both at officer level, PCSO, and special constable. Now, I'm confident that they're a priority, and I don't deny that that is a firmly held belief. My question was, will they be delivered during this police and crime plan? When it ends in 5 years' time, will we see an extra 1,300 officers on the streets?
I mean, my answer is that that's the ambition of the manifesto. That's something that we're all charged to deliver, and we're working through how we can.
It wasn't an ambition. It was a manifesto commitment. We will have a further 1,300 officers. Now, I'm fine if a manifesto wants to say it is an ambition to deliver, it is a priority to deliver, it is a hope that we will deliver. That wasn't the case. We will deliver. It's there in black and white. Actually, it's there in white on orange. But will they be delivered?
the commitments are there. As I said, we're really working through how we're going to deliver on that. We're working through the delivery. That's why the prioritisation is there in terms of neighbourhood policing. That's why we're talking to the Home Office repeatedly about the importance of those numbers. It's something that is, also in the National Manifesto, and relates to, the missions that the government has. So we're making sure that we're making that case to them.
Okay, thank you. One further, if I may, Chair. Police stations play an important role in neighbourhood policing. I understand that the Met has drawn its conclusions regarding the estate strategy. Thank you so much. I was groping for those words. Regarding the estate strategy, have you seen the estate strategy, and will we get a chance to see it anytime soon?
So I think this is something that, Chair, we discussed at the budgetary meeting. The Metropolitan Police have submitted their estate strategy, and the issue we're having is that currently it's a rightly ambitious plan. The Commissioner talks passionately about fixing the foundations and that being aligned with the estate strategy. However, currently, in fiscal terms, we can't accept the strategy because it's unaffordable. So what we're working through currently, and I know that members of the Assembly are frustrated on this issue because it has been going on for so long and there's been different iterations on different commissioners, and I recognise that. But I also think it's important that, in good conscience with public money, we can't, take something that is unaffordable. So we need to work through the interim ambitions and what needs to be done in line with the workforce, and we've been doing that through the London Policing Board, the Culture Board.
If I may, the strategy is there. I accept that you can't accept the strategy because it is unaffordable in your view at the moment. However, we are the elected representatives of Londoners here on this committee. Even if it's unaffordable, can we see it now, the draft? Even if you're not going to accept it, will you give it? Even if it's in confidence, will you allow us sight of the current draft?
I think that would be a question for the Commission.
No, it's a question for you, Deputy Mayor. Would you recommend that we are allowed to see the draft?
Well, not really, because it's not accepted, so we're not going to take it forward. I mean, I think in terms of transparency, we need to make sure that public money is safeguarded and it's affordable. And
that's why we're here, to ensure that, and so that we can scrutinise it properly, and we would like to see it. Do you agree that we should see it?
I can't agree to that in its current iteration.
Still a draft. Okay, thank you, Chair.
The reason this is being asked is we have been asking on this committee for years and years and years about this. And really, Madam Deputy Mayor, please, can you answer these questions, but the actual questions, not go all around the houses, because we're running out of time. And we are all very, very disappointed that yet again we're not seeing this strategy. It's really not good enough. Now we're running short of time. Last question on this section from Assembly Member Best.
Thank you, Chair. And just quickly, both, I had to go back and check after you kept saying that the trust and confidence was stabilising to see that it is still falling in 5 out of the 6 metrics in the last 12 months. But the final question from me is, do you think the draft plan goes far enough to address online and tech-enabled crime?
I mean, as previously discussed, I think that this, is an area that we need national legislation on. That's why the Online Harm Act is coming forward. It's something that, as previously said, is a space that is characteristic in all crime areas. We've discussed in counter-extremism terms today, but it is something we're prevalent on. And, if it is something that I'm conscious of and we need to work forward on, but we can't prioritise everything in the plan. So I want us to, also recognise that national legislation will enable some of this as well.
So it sounds to me slightly a recognition that it doesn't take pride of place in the plan, but something that you think should be prioritised through national legislation. Was that the answer?
So national legislation is coming forward in this area, and I think that is important and significant. But what I was saying, in all areas of the priorities, that there is a online element, and therefore it will be kind of something that we need to look at in every area.
So, I mean, I think I've touched on it already. I won't repeat. This is a national challenge. This is driving crime at an industrial scale. It's driving polarisation of society, and it's a real concern for us. You know, this is something that needs to be addressed nationally, though. It can't be done through one policing and crime plan or 43 plans and 43 forces. This needs to be worked across all of the agencies, National Crime Agency and partners, to see how we can address some of these threats.
Yeah, Assistant Commissioner, I think you touched on it earlier. You said something about hoping to have more support from AI in doing your work, but I couldn't help but think at that moment that for all the help that AI will support you with, that creates the new base of crime that you have to fight. Obviously, we've seen, especially with deep fakes, the Mayor himself was a target of that. And was a really polarising use of that technology. There's been a really good documentary recently from Vicky Patterson on Channel 4 talking about that in relation to sex crimes. Will you be feeding all this back into national government? Kyra, is that more job for you? Are you having those conversations about the need to accelerate legislation in this area?
I mean, the short answer is yes. Actually, Andrea, who sits on the Andrea Simons, who sits on the London Policing Board, was in that documentary as an expert in that area. So, you know, she's really helping and supporting us through the VORG work as well, to make sure that, you know, we are illustrating and evidencing the work that we need to have with Home Office to get this national legislation right.
Okay, thank you. We're now moving on to improving the criminal justice system and supporting victims. I'm very, very pleased to welcome to the meeting Claire Waxman, who is, of course, our Victims Commissioner for London. Welcome, and thank you for coming. Assembly Member Ahmed is starting these questions.
Thank you very much. Assistant Commissioner, you spoke earlier about Operation Satira and or Bluestone Satira, as it used to be known. And I've said before, and I'll say again, this is an example of exemplary work by the Met, and it's something that we really should be, you know, singing from the rooftops. It is wonderful that nationally this has now been taken up. Could I ask you, how could the successes of Operation Satira in providing a more victim-focused approach be applied to improve victim experience in other areas?
Thank you. I'll touch on a few things that we are doing, but I'm sure Claire will have, you know, her views as the Victims Commissioner. We've just put in a new lead responsible officer for victims. Our new MyMet service is helping equip officers with the bespoke Power App that enables them to give digital version of victims' information leaflet, which is a mandatory requirement of the Victims Code, and also link to a survey so they can provide feedback, so we can get more real-time feedback from all victims as opposed to just a subset of victims that go through our sort of telephone reporting. Victims forums. This year, the Victim Care Improvement Team will be engaging with a further 5 victims forums to ensure we hear from groups of people we don't hear from as frequently. For example, victims from black communities, young people, VORG, LGBTQ+. New training, invest in new training for our workforce to help foster a better culture and how we engage with the public. 11,000 officers and staff have completed this training as of December 2024. Enhanced training for all officers to new training packages currently in development, which cover trauma-informed practice and the Victims Code, which will launch in late February of 25. Answering emergency calls, I mentioned at the start around Engage, how we've got better at that. Which is a good thing. And then finally, I'll mention the Victims Focus Desk, where we have a dedicated number that victims can call for updates around crime, arrest or referrals. And by late last year, we were handling about 30,000 calls a month, which is something that we didn't have 18 months ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the meeting, Claire. It's great to have you here. My questions are for you. Do you think the Met is on the right track to improve the service it provides to victims?
Thank you. I mean, as we've just heard, there's a huge amount of work underway with the Met, and we have really seen some great progress, I'd say, over the last 18 months. Obviously, you're all aware I've been in the role since 2017, and I don't think I'd seen this level of commitment previously, so I really do welcome that we are now finally focused on how to improve the service to victims. And as we've heard, we have the victim focus desks, which has been investment put into that to ensure that we have the right number of people on those desks. They do need to undergo training, so once that training has taken place and embedded, then I hope to see a consistent response to victims, which we're not quite there yet. So, you know, when victims obviously report a crime, the frustrations that we hear repeatedly is they're not getting regular updates and information on what's happening with their case. So we know that officers obviously have different shifts and can go on night shifts, so that victim focus desk should be providing that consistent level of support and response to victims. So it's great to have the desks, but yes, they need to be trained to ensure that they're providing that right level of service. So we're definitely in the right direction. We've had the victim information leaflet around for quite a few years. We know when that gets into the hands of victims, we see an increase in victim satisfaction. The issues that we're very aware of that we struggle with is ensuring that all victims get that information, and that's something that the Met is still working really hard to try and tackle. We have the Victims and Prisoners Act that has come in, and obviously the big commencement there is around there's a duty now on the Met and other statutory partners to promote the rights of victims' rights to victims. So that leaflet is absolutely paramount. And you've heard about the Victim Voice Forums, which I'm really pleased have been expanded. This is absolutely fundamental, because if the Met want to improve their service to victims, they really need to be listening to victims, extracting from their experiences and understanding how to improve their service. So it's really positive that we've had one Victim Voice Forum and that it's being expanded to actually capture the from black victims, disabled victims, etc., to really understand their unique experiences when they're trying to report to the police. So in answer to your question, there's a lot more focus and commitment and a lot of work underway, but we still have some way to go.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, one thing that I think all in this room probably struggle with is we will have constituents saying to us, well, there's no point in reporting, I don't want to report, or there's hesitation that somehow the report that somebody would make is a waste of police time, and it's that hesitancy. What would be your suggestion in terms of, I mean, I'm always encouraging people to report because it's very important, and it's important for police statistics, but it's also important to getting their issue resolved and justice enacted. Given that and our hesitancy, I think it's not just a London issue. I think it's actually a national issue around this hesitancy of reporting and the culture of underreporting. I mean, what would your suggestion be?
It's a really difficult one because we still have a situation of quite low trust and confidence, not just in the Met, you're absolutely right, it's a national issue, and not just in policing, but our wider criminal justice system. And so in order to instill that confidence and get victims to really come forward and report, one, yes, we have to really focus on the work we're doing with the Met to improve their response and improve their service. But there is something about communicating the good news stories, and I talk to the Met a lot about this because they're not actually, very good at communicating the good stories, and I see the good stories as well, and I think we need to be amplifying that much more, because that will then help with public confidence and victim confidence to see actually the Met are doing a good job. I mean, you talked about Operation Soteria. That's a huge success story. We can't underestimate the amount of work, and I don't say it that often, but I'm incredibly proud of the Met, the work that we have led on in London, and we led on this, and then it's been done nationally to really change that trajectory, what I saw when I came into this role in 2017. And that's thanks to the London Rape Reviews and MOPAC supporting and doing that research, that we now have a much better way of investigating and prosecuting rape, and that suspect-focused approach. And the question that you raised is a good one. It's about taking the fundamentals of Operation Soteria and now ensuring it's embedded across the Met in relation to other VORG offences, so that it's very much suspect focused, and we're not looking at victim credibility, we're looking at that suspect, and we're making sure that the investigation is properly moving forward. So there is something in that about getting some of these positive stories, and there are many, because I see obviously the Met Commissioner will share with the Mayor on a weekly basis, and I see that and I think, gosh, you know, that's not getting out into the public domain, just how some of the great work that's happening. And
Sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, the operation described is, you know, an incredible police work, but also we, you know, as you're very familiar with, we had Clearhold build in on the Grand Park estate, which has been transformative, and indeed Operation Terminus along the A5, which has touched, you know, the lives of people across Kilburn, Cricklewood, up into Burnt Oak as well. And it is those stories, and it's only possible because people have been engaging and reporting and collaborative work between councils and the Met, and it's just been incredible, and it's getting those stories out that I think is really important. But what specific actions will you take to increase victim confidence and satisfaction in the wider criminal justice system?
Well, it's incredibly difficult at the moment to. We are constantly trying to do that work, but we have to realise that, you know, the reality is that the criminal justice system, which obviously wider than policing, has been chronically underfunded for many years and mismanaged. And so the reality of that is victims are waiting even longer from reporting to getting into court. And that doesn't help with victim confidence in the system. So we are supporting government, my office and I are supporting government in the reform work that they're doing, obviously looking at the sentencing reform, looking at the court reform as well. All this work needs to take place quite urgently, and they need to be really bold reforms if we hope to address that ever-increasing backlog, which unfortunately, you know, we can focus on the Met and we can focus on policing and really try and improve the response to victims, as we're doing in rape, double that charge rate. Now that's great, but the issue I've got is I've got more victims coming into a system that is absolutely log-jammed and is not, you know, they cannot get into court. And that just impacts victim trust and confidence and causes a lot of issues around them wanting to withdraw from the process. So it's very challenging. But we, you know, we're trying to support central government a lot on that work that needs to take place to tackle those issues.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And getting good news out, I have to say, Assistant Commissioner, is why it's so helpful that you are here, or somebody from the Met can come and tell us all the good things that are being done. Because if you don't tell us, we don't necessarily know. So thank you. Did you want to very briefly add anything to that or not? If not, we'll run. 3 very quick points. The communication, I think we're trying harder on social media and elsewhere on good news, but candidly, mainstream media don't report good news as often as they report bad. So anything this committee, other politicians, other leaders can do to amplify those messages would be really welcome. In terms of the victims piece, I think 2 key things that we're going to be doing from April. Volume crime teams with more manageable workloads will mean that we will be able to better focus our investigative resource on the solvable crime, which means that actually the officers will be able to update their victims because they won't be completely snowed under with 50 or 60 crimes. And also the crime management unit providing quality assurance and quicker updates. But also in cases where it isn't solvable, just being honest about that and sort of closing a crime so we don't keep on updating the victim that in something where we know it can't be solved, we keep sort of updating them for weeks on end and then saying it's closed down. So 2 really tangible things that I think will assist in our sort of shared endeavour to improve victim service. Lovely, thank you. Finally, we're going over to Assembly Member Cooper. You've got just less than 8 minutes, Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you. I was just listening to what the Victims Commissioner was saying about the wider criminal justice system. Some years ago, I did jury service at the Old Bailey. It all worked perfectly. It was smooth. You know, I participated in 2 cases, outcomes, all the rest of it. I just did jury service just before Christmas, not at the Old Bailey, at another Crown Court in London, completely broken. You couldn't even get in and out of the building, and this is the jurors, let alone members of the public or I mean, I think the barristers probably had a bit of a fast track because they didn't have electronic scanners. There were hand searches. It took you just hours to get in and out. It was absolutely disgraceful, and then completely broken after that, totally a mess. So for victims of crime who are going through that experience, appalling. That's not what I wanted to ask you about. I wanted to ask you about the Victim Care Hub, which is part of the current police and crime plan that's just coming to an end, 2022-25. That was a commitment in that plan. What progress have we made towards that Victim Care Hub?
Thank you. So MOPAC, obviously, as you were, the Mayor and the previous Deputy Mayor were very supportive of this long-standing vision that I've had around an independent victim care hub. They undertook a comprehensive business case, and so they assessed the options for delivering this victim care hub. They recognised the positive changes it would bring, but it did highlight some complexities in trying to deliver it. So potentially, well, there is a need for investment into something like this, and possibly some changes to the Victims Code or primary legislation through a victim legislation as well, because a lot of the responsibilities around the Victims Code informing victims sits with the police. So there will be some difficulties in the police trying to discharge their duties and give that to a different body or entity to deliver that. But I think, so we've made some headway, and what MOPAC are now doing are working really closely with the Met and the CPS, looking at how they embed some of these sort of principles of the Victim Care Hub into their ways of working. What I would say is, that's great. I still believe in this Victim Care Hub. I do believe, but it goes beyond policing. So it's one that I'm taking to government when we're looking at the court reform work. I think we need to be looking at what investment is being put into the system, in the criminal justice system for victims, not just in policing and our witness care units, but CPS. They now have victim liaison officers, spend X amount of million a year, probation, their victim liaison officers. Everyone works in silo, and this is the issue for victims. We want that single point of contact, because that victim travels that entire journey, not just with the police, but all the way through. So I think there's a call on government here really to look at how much are you investing in victim support through the criminal justice system, and can we take that that we've already got, that we're investing, and actually put it into something that's more effective. And that's what I would like to look at.
Yeah, I'm picking up that there's an issue here for government to be looking at from what you're saying, but also talking about the sort of the liaison issue between yourself and anybody who's supporting victims and the overall police. So I wondered if both yourself and Matt Twist could comment on how you're working together to stop victim attrition rates of people just saying, actually, I've had enough of this, I'm not prepared to go to court, and what areas do you think need to be prioritised over the next 4 years as we look at the new police and crime plan coming in? What do we need to focus on?
So I don't know if you're aware, I actually commissioned a piece of research around victim attrition, and that came out of the previous London rate reviews, and there was a piece of work done around domestic abuse. It showed really high attrition rates, and really wanting to understand. I have an idea, working with victims, what's driving that attrition, but I thought it was really important to do that piece of research. And MOPAC's been doing that research, and we hope we'll publish in the next few months. So what I will say to you is when that's published, I will be making quite strong recommendations for the Met, but other partners as well, how we tackle that victim attrition. So that will be a big focus. It's a big focus of work.
So the research should show us in more detail.
It will show us much more detail,
because we allude to the length of time or the brokenness of the journey and all of those things, but this is going to drill down. Yeah,
very much so. So MOPAC are doing their research, and alongside that, we are meeting with victims and doing victim focus groups as well. So that'll be a comprehensive piece of research like we've done previously, and I think it'll be an excellent piece of work, and all the partners are waiting for it, but I think that's going to give us great insight into why and when victims are withdrawing and what we need to do to reduce that withdrawal.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful. Do you want to come in on that, or do you want to wait until we get that piece of research, or do you have any thoughts about, what causes this issue?
So I think the piece of research is going to be really important, because who am I to say what it is? I mean, our instinct is timeliness, and confidence in outcome is really, and the attritional and the sort of adversarial nature of the thing is key factors. And if you're dealing with a 16-year-old victim of robbery, the suspect may not get to court until that young person is sort of 20 or 21 years old. 4 or 5 years on, potentially now. We've got court schedules listing in 2028. So I think it's really, timeliness for me is critical. And also I think for me, confidence in what might happen. And I give an example. There's an opportunity to mention it. So we've discussed phone theft and robbery already, linking to confidence in terms of doing the basics. Well, our Westminster proactive team did a really good job. They arrested a suspect who's 16 years old for robbery in Westminster, stealing a phone. The suspect had 4 stolen phones wrapped in tin foil on them already, as well as the one we got them for, and a substantial history of violent crimes, theft and robberies. The week before that incident, only 6 days before, that same suspect had been sentenced at court for 20 robberies, thefts, ABHs and handling stolen goods, and had been given a 12-month supervision order. So with 43 impending prosecutions, we kept the person in custody and asked the court to remand. They did not remand. So there's something around confidence in that you've got a one-person crime wave here, that there's only so much the police can do. As Claire's rightly said, in terms of we're at the very front end of it, we can put the people into the system. But if the system, because of shortages of placements for young people, or shortages of remand cells, or shortages of other things, or capacity, isn't able to deal with what we put in the top of the hopper, then it becomes incredibly challenging. And I can see why victims might lose confidence in that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And just on a personal note, one of the things that, which I think I mentioned actually last time I saw you here, Claire, having undergone stalking myself, and the one thing that I found incredibly difficult was I live in one place and reported it to my local police force. The stalker lived somewhere else. It had to be reported, that I had to go through exactly the same discussion, and then the events that were referred to by the stalker had taken place in another police force. Having to repeat the story is actually quite re-traumatising, and I think a victim-centred approach should try and avoid that wherever possible, because that is the kind of thing that I personally think leads to attrition of cases. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And how frustrating for police officers to do the job really, really well, only to find that they're back on the streets again. Incredibly frustrating. Really exciting to wait for that report of yours, and I'm sure we'll all be interested to read it. Thank you so much for coming to the meeting. If you want to go now, completely understand. Thank you. We're on to our very last section, which we will speed through, colleagues. Delivery and performance, and Assemblymember Ahmed is taking the lead on this.
Thank you, Chair. So, Deputy Mayor, we heard previously suggestions that the draft police and crime plan lacks details. Now, I've actually gone through it, and I've found details about funding for youth workers and mentors through the VRU for youth violent crime, young people caught with knives receiving a mandatory plan to prevent reoffending with drugs, tough enforcement action against individuals and street gangs through Operation Yamati, forgive me if I can't pronounce that correctly, safeguarding, setting up an appropriate adult service for vulnerable adults in London. I could go on, and of course the Assistant Commissioner talked about the work that's been done with, in terms of mobile phone thefts, designing out thefts, basically, working with manufacturers. I wonder, could you give us any more detail around how the plan will be achieved and how MOPAC is going to address any concerns about lack of detail?
I mean, first of all, Assemblymember Ahmed, I think thank you for recognising the detail, because it was really important for me that we showed the priorities, but also how we were going to go about reaching our aims. But I think it's also really important to recognise that it's still in draft. So, you know, the feedback that we're hearing from Londoners rightly should shape what we're doing. And then when that is concluded, we want to make sure that through that kind of theory of change, that we're coming up with a dashboard that really looks at, I'm very passionate about taking an outcomes approach, so what we should be able to expect in terms of outcomes, and having a dashboard, and as well as our internal oversight and through the oversight bodies like yourself and others, that those are regularly checked in on.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Chair, shall I take the next question? It's listed. I'm sure you are. Trying to be
ready,
helpful.
willing and able. Just to come back on that, just to clarify, we're taking some of these questions come from what we've heard already. And at its meeting on the 15th of January, the committee heard that the draft PCP was missing information on how its aims were going to be achieved. For example, Nahar Chowdhury, CEO of Solace Women's Aid, said it was very difficult to comment on this plan because its lack of detail. And in addition, Professor Jyoti Ballur said, you talk about public health approaches, but what does that involve? So these questions are coming actually from points that were brought forward from our guests, just so you know that they haven't been just thought up. Madam Deputy Mayor, how will MOPAC ensure robust evaluation of the commitments in the police and crime plan?
And if I may, Chair, I think it's also important to recognise that this is an overarching plan, and that it's important that every area, like the comments made by the person from Solace, are really important, because that needs to feed into the VORG strategy and us illustrate that through the detail underneath. You know that MOPAC's evidence and insight team conduct evaluations on all the site services that come under the plan, and we make sure that that evidence is published and transparent and contributes to our future policy making. And this is most evident, you know, the work extensively done, as an example, through the VRU, and the evaluation and the funded interventions we've taken forward through that.
Well, no doubt we'll be scrutinising more as we go along on that, as you would expect. When will MOPAC start its trial approach to using, and I'm quoting, using big data modelling to produce annual forecasts of crime in London, and what does this involve?
I know this is something that the Data and Insight team are really passionate about taking forward. Big data modelling involves using all the data available to us, including things like historic crime figures, socio-economic factors and population trends, to identify the patterns and forecasts of crime for future years. And I think AC Twist will recognise the importance of being able to do that in terms of forward and strategic planning.
Okay, do you want to comment on that, Matt?
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, we can already track data back over the last 7 or 8 years, looking at seasonality, and month by month can predict sort of where different offences will peak, but using bigger amounts of data and larger sort of computing power, we'll be able to get much more precise around that. And I think that's the key in terms of taking all of the factors, not just sort of reported crime, and amalgamating that into something that can be more useful for us in terms of tasking and deployment.
Yeah, very important. Okay, fine, thank you. We've come to the end now, and I know I keep labouring this, but it is so good to be able to ask the Metropolitan Police what is going on and to get answers from somebody who does have the detail. If not, we can't do our job properly. To scrutinise, we have got to ask the Metropolitan Police. So I know the Commissioner's coming to our next meeting, for which we're also very grateful, but we would be delighted to see you at any point on the question and answer sessions, because you then can put forward all the good work that you are doing. Okay, thank you. So I will officially thank our guests for attending this morning and for your answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report in the discussion? Thank you. Note the monthly report from MOPAC, and note that the committee's response to the Mayor's draft police and crime plan will be formally agreed at a future meeting of this committee. Since publication of the agenda, it has been agreed that the committee's next meeting will be a question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme for the 24-25 Assembly year and note the additional activity undertaken since its last meeting, namely the informal briefing of artificial intelligence. The next meeting of this committee is scheduled to take place on Wednesday the 12th of February at 10 a.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.
Home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.